One day, out of absolutely nowhere, a freaking massive tower suddenly appeared right in the middle of the city, marking the beginning of the end of the world. Humanity completely lost their minds, calling it the apocalypse. And this guy right here is J1. Before the end times, he was just an ordinary guy, living a carefree life at the rock bottom of society. He started climbing the tower much later than everyone else. Because of that, when it came to fancy things like hidden skills or hidden classes, he didn't have any of that crap. So, he decided to completely ignore all those useless options and went all in on one single skill, the normal thrust. Through endless blood, sweat, and tears, he managed to take down over 50 monsters all on his own. His teammates thought his skill was mediocre at best, but as time went on, his thrusts gradually began to change. They became faster, more precise, and pushed way past the limits of human movement, unleashing devastating strikes that could easily rival any hidden skill. During his monster-slaying, level-grinding journey, J1 met true comrades and formed humanity's final suicide squad, Carpe Diem. On the 77th floor, the walkers discovered the Regression Stone. It had the power to send the user back in time to the exact moment they were first summoned. All of their memories up to the present moment would remain completely intact. By shattering the Regression Stone, they could return to the past, but they would end up in a parallel universe, completely disconnected from their current reality. Because of this, there was absolutely no guarantee that everyone who used the stone would end up in the exact same world. Around that time, the second Great Tower earthquake struck the world outside. With humanity on the brink of total annihilation, the climbers of the tower were forced to make a choice when staring death in the face. Countless walkers ended up using the Regression Stone to escape to the past, abandoning this chaotic world to its fate. But J1's squad, Carpe Diem, refused to be tempted by the Regression Stone and resolved to fight to their very last breath. J1's squad climbed higher and higher, overcoming endless obstacles and hardships, until they finally set foot on the 98th floor of the tower. J1 thought things would go smoothly, but the monster on the 98th floor of Purgatory was insanely tough. It spat out molten lava that melted all their weapons, taking down almost all of J1's squad. He got rammed by the monster, sending him flying 8 meters into a wall as he coughed up blood. J1 began to feel utter despair. He thought about his fallen comrades. They had faced so much together and overcome so many obstacles, only to die like dogs now? No freaking way. Yunhwan, J1's friend, gripped his sword and slashed at the beast to draw its attention away from J1. Yunhwan urged him to hang in there, shouting that he couldn't defeat this monster on his own. The monster glared, spun around, and impaled Yunhwan with its horn. It didn't stop there, slamming him hard against the rocky ground. J1 couldn't stand to watch anymore and charged forward to fight the monster and save his friend. Suddenly, J1 saw a strange white line of light connecting his strike to the monster. Without hesitation, he thrust his sword straight into the guiding light. The monster shattered into pieces, unable to regenerate. Yunhwan, coughing violently, slumped against the cliff wall, blood pooling around him. J1 noticed that Yunhwan was holding a regression stone in his hand. Yunhwan looked at him and choked out an apology. Yunhwan was always someone who smiled. Even inside this cruel, miserable tower, the smile on his face had never faded. That was why the other walkers had nicknamed him the Clown Knight. This was the very first time J1 had ever seen the Clown Knight lose his smile. J1 couldn't bear to look at him, so he turned away and told Yunhwan to just get lost. He walked away without looking back a single time. Yunhwan let out a bitter smile. The stone in his hand wasn't actually a regression stone at all. It was just a plain, ugly pebble. But deep down, J1 probably already knew that. Dragging his heavy steps, Yunhwan made his way up the stairs, sat by the tower window, leaned back, and fell down. He felt incredibly lucky that this world had someone like J1 in it. J1 stood before the doors to the 99th floor, thinking of all his fallen friends, and pushed forward. As the doors opened, a vast white snowfield stretched out before him. Panting heavily, J1 dodged the attacks of the 99th floor boss, the ice dragon Velkasis. After a fierce battle, J1 was completely unable to defeat it. This ice dragon was massive, insanely powerful, and constantly trash-talked him to break his spirit. Frozen by the extreme cold, J1 Giant retreated into an ice cave to recover and tend to his wounds, while the ice dragon continued to circle outside. J1 bit down hard on a piece of cloth as he poured some potion over his frozen wounds. It had been 15 years since he first reached the 99th floor. Even though he had faced thousands of death-defying dangers below, the danger level of the 99th floor was in a completely different league compared to the lower levels. Jaewon gritted his teeth, holding in any sound of pain. Outside, the ice dragon kept unleashing its icy breath everywhere. Its freezing breath originated from the Forgotten Lands. Even with maxed-out cold resistance, it was nearly impossible to endure. If it weren't for the leftover gear pieces left behind by the climbers who abandoned this place, Jaewon would have died a long time ago. He pulled out his gear, ready to fight. The sword he picked up on the 85th floor, the Frost Demon armor they gave him, and even the Fire King bracelet that belonged to Han Seo-jun, the girl who had passed away. Jaewon clutched the bracelet tightly, whispering apologies over and over, as memories of the day she died flashed through his mind. Jaewon found himself thinking back to his conversation with Jae, the blacksmith of Aderpost. The village of Atorpost had finally recovered after they defeated the boss monster on the 50th floor. Even though dead bodies and wounded players were still brought in every single day, the people there never lost hope. Priests constantly formed emergency rescue squads to quickly treat the soldiers who could no longer fight. Along with them, blacksmiths in their workshops worked tirelessly to craft new gear for the tower climbers, ready to give everything for the sake of humanity. Jae was probably the very last blacksmith left in Atorpost now. Since almost no humans survived in the tower anymore, Jaewon didn't even know what year it was. There had been over 10 massive earthquakes so far, and, at some point, humans stopped being summoned to climb the tower altogether. Humanity was on the brink of total extinction. Just 2 days ago, Old Lady Helen had vanished. People didn't age inside the tower, so if someone suddenly vanished, it could only mean one of two things. Either they returned to the past, or they jumped to their death. Helen from the medical clinic and the blacksmith Jae were among the very few supporters left. Jae stared sorrowfully at the glowing red iron. Jaewon asked him to teach him the art of blacksmithing. Back in the present, Jaewon quickly forged a new sword for himself and went back to face the frost dragon. The dragon remarked that since the tower's creation, not a single human had ever made it to the 99th floor, entirely on their own. It admitted that Jaewon was a truly impressive human. Jaewon gave a bitter laugh. How ironic that the last one to acknowledge him was a monster, not a fellow human. Holding his sword high, Jaewon charged in again, only to get brutally battered, leaving him covered in blood. The frost dragon scoffed at his stubbornness, telling him that no matter how hard he struggled, his only reward would be absolute loneliness. Jaewon completely ignored its words, treating the dragon's speech like annoying background noise. Shaking off the ice block the dragon had thrown at him, Jaewon lunged forward once more, refusing to back down. A Chinese martial arts master once said he doesn't fear the one who practices 100 moves, but the one who practices a single move 100 times. Jaewon was exactly that kind of person. He had no flashy skills. His only special move was the single slash. Once again, he executed his single slash to strike. Hundreds of single slashes only managed to leave a tiny scratch on the frost dragon. Just as the beast opened its mouth to spit another blast, Jaewon spotted that strange white light again. Without a second thought, he gripped his sword tightly and lunged directly at the gathering light. The dragon's jaw shattered, its tongue lolling out, driving it absolutely insane with rage. Spreading its wings, it soared into the air, charging up another chaotic barrage. Jaewon rolled across the ground, desperately trying to dodge its icy spit, but he couldn't keep it up. Exhausted, he collapsed to the ground, panting heavily as the dragon mocked him again. It would take at least 10 of him to even stand a chance of defeating it. The frost dragon let slip a crucial piece of information. If humanity's conquest hadn't been manipulated by the Nightmare Stone, their fate would have been entirely different. What a tragedy. Jaewon froze in shock. His eyes widened as he demanded to know what the hell this Nightmare Stone was. But the dragon didn't answer, bringing its massive foot down to crush him instead. Fortunately, Jaewon used his flash step to escape, slipping out through the door and slamming it shut. That was a close call. One scratch from those claws would have ended him. He couldn't stop thinking about the Nightmare Stone the dragon had mentioned. Quietly, he vowed never to give up. 5 years later, he returned and finally took down the frost dragon. The system announced that he had defeated the boss of the 99th floor, with all his stats reaching their absolute maximum. Jaewon let out a weary sigh, sitting atop the dying beast's head. He dismissed the notifications one by one, glancing down to press the dragon for answers about the Nightmare Stone. Even on the brink of death, the dragon refused to talk. It simply told him that he would find all his answers on the final floor, before dissolving into a magnificent sword. Jaewon pocketed his loot. As the dragon faded away, a dark portal materialized, leading to the final floor, the 100th floor. Without hesitation, Jae-won stepped right in. Before his eyes, a massive array of screens appeared, broadcasting live feeds of the lower floors. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room, admitting it hadn't expected him to barge straight in like this. It assumed he would head back to the village first, telling him to relax and wait just a moment. A system notification popped up, congratulating Jae-won for being the first to conquer all the tutorial games of World 294. His impressive achievements had been recorded in the immortal Akashic records, and only the lords of the Great Lands were authorized to access them, viewed by the monarch of the Great Land. Jae-won's eyes widened as he stared at the notification window. What the hell is this? Right before his eyes, a horrific scene of countless corpses unfolded. They were sinking deep into the abyss. Suddenly, a bizarre figure emerged from the water, a creature with a human body but the head of a wild beast. Its massive frame was dressed in a sharp, elegant suit. Looking Jae-won up and down, it remarked that he had recovered much faster than expected. On guard, Jae-won demanded to know who this creature was. The monster smugly introduced itself as the business demon, B-Strain. It could not believe Jae-won had managed to solo his way up to the 100th floor. This was completely unprecedented. It turned out, B-Strain was the true master of this terrifying tower. Jae-won frowned as he stared at the beast. According to the notification he just saw, everything they had been through so far was merely a tutorial. This meant the actual game had not even begun yet. Grinning, B-Strain praised him for being so quick-witted. With a snap of its fingers, it projected a montage of Jae-won's past struggles right before him. Watching the footage, B-Strain casually commented that so much had happened, and that it was as dramatic as a blockbuster movie. It asked Jae-won if it all came flooding back, all that pain, anger, and regret. But B-Strain did not stop there, continuing to babble on without a care. It promised to grant him a brand new chance, tempting him to start the entire game over from the very beginning. B-Strain leaned in close, whispering into Jae-won's ear that getting a second chance at life is something that usually only happens in fantasy novels. It argued that for a mere mortal like Jae-won, getting to redo everything while keeping his current memories was an absolute steal. Jae-won's eyes widened in sheer confusion. Was this really not the end? Wasn't he supposed to save the world once he cleared the top floor of the tower? What on earth was actually happening here? Jae-won finally realized the ugly truth. He had been completely played by this demon from day one. There was never a way for them to stop the catastrophic tower shocks in the first place, and the only thing they could do was to keep endlessly clearing the tower. But saving humanity was nothing more than a pipe dream. Jae-won took a deep breath, looked B-Strain dead in the eye, and spoke with absolute resolve. He declared that he would never go back to the past. B-Strain burst into a mocking, hysterical laughter, sneering, asking if Jae-won was seriously still talking about going back to the past. B-Strain looked down on Jae-won with utter contempt, explaining that there was not a single item in this tower, or even in the Great Land, that could actually send a human back in time. Jae-won demanded to know what it meant by that. It suddenly clicked. He remembered the words of the Ice Dragon, how things would have been different if their conquest had not been derailed by the Nightmare Stone. B-Strain laid it all bare for him, explaining that the item was never a stone of regression, but rather the Nightmare Stone. The Nightmare Stone did not have the power to send humans back in time. Instead, it trapped them in an endless loop of illusions generated by the stone itself. B-Strain sneered, admitting it never could have imagined what would happen once humanity finally managed to reach the 77th floor. Humans were so obsessed with redoing their lives that they could not resist the sweet temptation of the Nightmare Stone. Jae-won fell silent for a moment before replying quietly, "Yeah, you are right." Thinking he had successfully hooked his prey, B-Strain snapped its fingers to summon a hologram screen. Once again, it tried to entice Jae-won to start the real game, not by regressing to the past, but by simply restarting the climb from the very beginning. B-Strain was absolutely confident that Jae-won would make the smart choice, but to its utter shock, Jae-won did not hesitate for a second and slammed the decline button. Thanks to B-Strain, he finally understood the true nature of this tower. He had entered the illusion of the Nightmare Stone, the very source where the tower was constructed. Since that was the case, he was going to hunt down this demon, B-Strain, and force his way to the next level. B-Strain shook its head in disappointment, scoffing, asking what next floor he was talking about since there was no such thing, and that they were already at the very top of the tower. Jae-won refused to believe a single word out of the demon's mouth. While B-Strain was in the middle of trying to convince him, Jae-won unleashed a powerful strike that blew its head clean off. B-Strain let out a sigh. Even with its head severed, its mouth kept moving, trying to negotiate. It asked Jaewon what he actually wanted. Items, skills, cheat codes, it could grant him absolutely anything, but Jaewon refused to listen, declaring that he did not need a single damn thing from it. B-Strain let out a sinister laugh as its severed head began to regenerate. It told Jaewon that returning to his original world was completely out of the question. B-Strain snapped its fingers again, displaying a new set of images. It explained that this entire nightmare tower was nothing but a dream. From the very start, there was no such thing as a tower shock. Jaewon stared at the projection, showing a world that was peaceful, bustling, and completely normal, as if not a single soul had ever died. Jaewon saw hospital wards filled with patients, and there he was, his own body lying on a hospital bed hooked up to a ventilator. B-Strain pointed out that while Jaewon had spent an entire century inside the tower, only about 1 month had passed in the real world. No matter what he did, Jaewon could not land a decisive blow on B-Strain. The power gap between them was as massive as the difference between a mere human and an ancient dragon. Jaewon fell silent, but he did not care. He had slain a dragon before, so he would just have to do it again. He raised his sword and prepared to fight. Realizing its words were falling on deaf ears, B-Strain gave up on talking, and the two clashed in a fierce battle. Covered in wounds from head to toe, Jaewon returned to the workshop of the blacksmith, Ray. But with the blacksmith nowhere to be found, he had no choice but to forge his own sword. Yesterday marked his 72nd daily challenge against B-Strain. Yet, despite his relentless efforts, he had not been able to leave even a single scratch on the demon. Even so, he was still breathing. He did not know why, but it seemed the demon had absolutely no intention of taking his life. So no matter how many days or years it takes, he still has to keep on fighting. Sitting in the control room, B-Strain chewed on his fingernails, watching Jaewon train relentlessly with his sword. He constantly reminded himself that he had to be patient. To a ruler like him, Jaewon was a product that had to be sold, an extremely special, high-grade commodity. In all his life, B-Strain had never met anyone quite like this guy, and it was giving him a massive headache. As a ruler whose job was to nurture and train premium, top-tier products, he knew that for a product to fully adapt to the Great Land, it had to go through 2 steps. The first step, similar to selecting the best seeds in farming, was the process of identifying premium products through the game's tutorial. The selected products would then be nurtured through the main game. The second step was the cultivation process, growing these hand-picked seeds by feeding them water and fertilizer. But a product like Jaewon actually dared to refuse step 2. Should he just kick him to the curb? If Jaewon ended up dying inside the tower, it seemed his soul wouldn't just vanish. B-Strain racked his brain, but what if Jaewon's soul got damaged due to the massive gap between their power levels? The thought alone gave B-Strain goosebumps. If that happened, the harvesters wouldn't let him off easily. To make the sale, he had to find a way to nurture Jaewon without hurting him. B-Strain tapped his fingers restlessly on the armrest. He was so close to becoming a high-ranking demon, not to mention he still had a debt to pay back to the tower. Jaewon was an exceptionally special, high-grade product. Even gods who normally never dealt with demons had contacted him to place an order. The more B-Strain thought about it, the angrier he got. Just then, Jaewon returned. He charged out of the portal and launched a direct attack on B-Strain, making even the demon feel exhausted. "What the hell do you want?" B-Strain yelled as he parried Jaewon's sword strikes, trying to persuade him to just start the main game already. He had already explained it 100,000 times. If he joined, it would be a win-win situation, so why on earth wouldn't he play? Jaewon didn't even bother answering, treating B-Strain's words like dogs barking in the wind. Frustrated, B-Strain reached out, tightly grabbed Jaewon by the chin, lifted him up, and screamed right in his face, asking him what he wanted. He had already promised to give him skills and items, so why was he being so incredibly stubborn? Jaewon stubbornly refused to listen, repeating the same thing he always did. He would defeat B-Strain and move up to the next floor. B-Strain lost his mind, having yelled until his throat was sore that there was no freaking next floor. "Just play the main game, I'm begging you." Jaewon fell silent for a moment before he finally started asking questions. B-Strain sat up straight, putting on a mysterious front, and told Jaewon not to be too shocked. He explained that the universe actually consisted of more than one dimension, though Jaewon didn't look surprised at all. He already knew that. It was basic knowledge. Theories like parallel universes were all over Earth. So, B-Strain shifted gears and went into a more detailed explanation. The universe was formed by one primary dimension called the Great Land. B-Strain even went out of his way to project a diagram to help Jaewon understand. Earth was just a tiny planet located in one of the dimensions scattered alongside countless other realms, and they called Earthworld 294. Inside this Tower of Nightmares, walkers would obtain skills and items, as well as increase their stats to adapt to the system of the Great Land. Jaewon was given the chance to enter this new world, while demons like B-Strain were there to facilitate those games. Jaewon asked him, "Why are you doing all of this?" B-Strain smirked, refusing to share any more information. He snapped his fingers, and the surrounding space changed once again. B-Strain knew exactly what Jaewon was wondering. He wanted to know why, out of all the dimensions out there, the demonic towers appeared on Earth, and why humanity had to suffer such a fate. B-Strain babbled on with absolute confidence, as if he could read Jaewon like an open book. But Jaewon cut him off. What he actually wanted to ask was why B-Strain was running something like a demonic tower in the first place. Flustered by the question, the demon froze for a moment, stammering as he tried to come up with an excuse. "This is just a type of volunteer work." B-Strain broke into a cold sweat but tried his best to keep his cool. To sound more convincing, he added, "We demons actually love doing volunteer work. There's even a demon on another planet who loves taking care of walkers who gave up." B-Strain tried his hardest to persuade him, clearly flustered. Behind him, a message popped up. "The king has sent you a message regarding product cultivation." Jaewon's face hardened. Cut the crap. The last time Jaewon returned from battle, he was covered in wounds and had to constantly chug potions to heal himself. His stats had already reached their absolute limit, yet he still couldn't even lay a finger on B-Strain. Collapsing onto the freezing snow, Jaewon asked himself, "Are humans really defined by nothing more than these stats?" Suddenly, Jaewon felt a strange jolt run through him. He bolted upright, wondering what on earth it was. He felt something strange happening to his body. Jaewon's eyes widened as golden dust floated right before him. Thinking he was hallucinating, he reached out to grasp it. Motes of light continuously floated up, sometimes looking like gentle glowing particles, and other times like cubes of sugar. They constantly changed their shapes and structures. Instinctively, Jaewon realized those were the very forms that made up the essence of this world. In an instant, Jaewon understood everything. He didn't believe a single word this demon said. He asked who the monarchs were. B-Strain was thrilled that Jaewon was finally showing interest. He explained that the monarchs were the rulers of the Great Land, those who completed the main game and entered the Great Land. Normally, players would receive a blessing of power from one of the monarchs. Depending on which monarch the player chose, their future would change in that direction. B-Strain tried to sweet-talk him again, promising that if Jaewon listened to him, he would do his absolute best as a demon to ensure Jaewon served under an incredible monarch. Of course, that also depended on whether Jaewon would obediently participate in the main game. B-Strain was truly a highly skilled salesman, and Jaewon went along with it. He agreed to leave Earth in exactly 10 days. 9 days later, B-Strain was still sitting in the control room, watching Jaewon. He saw that Jaewon was still tirelessly practicing. B-Strain sighed in frustration. This guy is doing that useless thing again. Just like a boring soldier, he only had to wait a little longer until that day arrived. Besides, why was he so stupid back then, letting those nightmare bastards scam him into buying this piece of garbage tower? B-Strain slammed the table in frustration, repeatedly cursing the parents of those scamming nightmare bastards. In truth, B-Strain was tricked into buying the tower after being told it was made directly by a top-tier nightmare, making it a first-generation artifact. The tower was so old that B-Strain didn't even know when it was built. If it were a third-generation tower, like the ones on the market recently, there would be a function to force close the tutorial screen without damaging the product. But this first-generation tower was a hopeless case. B-Strain was bursting with rage. He couldn't end the game if the products didn't agree. So what could he even do now? Being poor really was a crime. But suddenly, hope surged within him once more, like a brilliant ray of light piercing through his chest. He comforted himself, thinking that this would all be over tomorrow. When the time came, B-Strain excitedly asked if Jaewon had memorized all the documents. He casually replied, "Yeah, now all that's left is to press the yes button." B-Strain was moved to tears, having waited for this day for so long. But right in the middle of his emotional moment, Jaewon suddenly drew his sword and ran him through. Confused, he asked, "What do you think you're doing?" Jaewon gripped the hilt tightly, spinning around to unleash a barrage of stabs. Ever since he started seeing those golden particles of light, his thrusts had gradually become more stable. With every stab, he felt a strange sense of dissonance. It was as if something deep within him had awakened, and Jaewon simply followed the trail of light, thrusting forward. He suddenly saw the light of his sword's path, filling him with endless thrill. Is this what it feels like to be alive? B-Strain was shredded to pieces. He summoned the black iron wood of the 91st floor to bind Jaewon. His body gradually pieced itself back together. Talk about impressive. This was the first time he had ever met someone like Jaewon. If they had just cooperated, both sides would have benefited. Ultimately, without his consent, there was no way to end the game. He had given up on getting Jaewon's agreement a long time ago. He asked him, "Why on earth did you think this tutorial would go on forever? This nightmare tower is programmed to automatically end the game 100 days after the tower is cleared. So you didn't need to do a single thing. Just stay put and quietly wait to join the main game." Jaewon froze for a moment, but then he gripped his hilt tightly again. He wasn't stupid enough to be fooled by this demon. In the Great Land, B-Strain was known as the Gentleman of Manipulation, having lived for 784 years and traveled back and forth between a total of 128 worlds. B-Strain had always continued his disgusting cultivation of the races in those worlds. Having his secret exposed, B-Strain was shocked. How did Jaewon know all that? Not only that, but Jaewon also knew B-Strain wanted to hand him over to a harvester known as the Dark Monarch. Terrified, B-Strain asked, Who are you, Jaewon?" Looking down from above, Jaewon replied that he might be a product B-Strain had cultivated for decades, but he didn't consider himself a product anymore. Jaewon broke free from the vines and pressed his attack. B-Strain was scared out of his wits, sweat pouring down as he watched Jaewon charge at him with a fierce, overwhelming aura. B-Strain took a painful slash. He was extremely tense, completely unable to comprehend what was happening. Ever since he set foot on the 100th floor, Jaewon's doubts grew. Was this tower also part of the nightmare? And was it possible that B-Strain couldn't kill him? He doubted even more. Could humans really have no value beyond these evaluated stats? Would the very essence of this world shatter? After that, countless doubts flooded Jaewon's mind. When he had nothing left to doubt, he mastered the art of the stab, and now he was unleashing that very technique on B-Strain. B-Strain kept reattaching his body. All jokes aside, B-Strain has completely lost his mind, baring his fangs and claws as he launches a vicious counterattack against Jaewon. The demon has to admit that achieving the second stage of adaptation right after finishing the tutorial is an extraordinary feat of talent. But at the end of the day, a mere mortal stands no chance against B-Strain. The demon mocks Jaewon as sharp thorns pierce through his flesh, making blood splatter everywhere. Yet, Jaewon tightly grips his weapon. His stats continuously skyrocket, rapidly climbing all the way to 9,999,999,999. B-Strain unleashes a devastating assault, but Jaewon doesn't back down. His stat counter doesn't stop there, ticking up one more notch to hit 10 billion. Once again, Jaewon spots that blinding white light. Firmly grasping the hilt of his sword, he thrusts forward, following the path illuminated by the light. Taking a direct hit, B-Strain is left in utter disbelief. What on earth is this guy? This isn't adaptation, this is awakening. Beaten to a pulp, B-Strain collapses to the ground. Jaewon looks down at him with pure disdain, telling the demon to stop reducing human lives to damn numbers just to measure their worth. Human lives aren't some cheap commodity for beasts like you to buy and sell. Staring at the blade pointed right at his face, B-Strain shuts his mouth, too terrified to utter a single sound. Jaewon stays true to his word, defeating B-Strain to advance to the next floor and search for the end of this god-forsaken world, a world created by those bizarre entities. Slowly, the space within the tower begins to shatter, as a blinding light of truth pierces through his very core. Jaewon's stats have now turned into unmeasurable, glitching variables. B-Strain can only weep in despair. He begs Jaewon to stop, screaming that there is no next floor. But Jaewon's conviction remains absolutely unshakable. He isn't just being stubborn by staying here. Back on the lower floors, he had noticed some cryptic, messy carvings. Reading those words felt like witnessing the agonizing pain of a suffering artist. According to the carvings left by someone named Mulak, the very creator of the Tower of Nightmares, there is another entity known as the Tree of Imagery. Brandishing the Frost Dragon sword with a terrifying look on his face, Jaewon demands to know if B-Strain has any idea how this place can serve as the root of the Tree of Imagery. In his mind, if there are roots, there must be a trunk, and if he destroys the ceiling of this floor, something is bound to happen. With that thought, Jaewon raises his weapon and shatters the ceiling. B-Strain screams in absolute despair as the system begins to calculate the conclusion of the tutorial. Ultimately, the calculation fails. The system reports that there are no walkers left inside the Tower of Nightmares. Jaewon has vanished without a trace. With the tutorial officially over, Jaewon wakes up in an unfamiliar forest, surrounded by dense trees. He is immediately greeted by a pack of snarling monsters bearing their fangs. As they charge toward him, Jaewon calmly swings his sword. He takes out one of them in a single strike, but a massive, towering beast suddenly emerges. His previous slash isn't going to cut it this time. Putting more power into his swing, Jaewon cleaves the giant beast in half. Once the battlefield is cleared, he begins harvesting horns from the fallen monsters one by one. Just as he hoists them onto his back to leave, a group of bug-like monsters blocks his path, pointing their fingers and shouting aggressive gibberish at him. Unfortunately, Jaewon can't understand a single word they're saying, even with his inspection skill active. Still, Jaewon is a reasonable man. Pointing to the horns he just gathered, he tries to negotiate a deal. He offers to hand them over if they tell him where he is. But the monsters arrogantly ignore his offer. Hell-bent on a fight, they charge straight at Jaewon. He can only sigh at their stupidity. These brainless bugs are practically begging for an early grave. Left with no choice, he wipes them out in an instant, leaving the surviving bugs in absolute shock. They can't believe a filthy mortal easily overpowered them. Jaewon grabs one of them by its antenna, demanding to know where they are, but the stubborn bug refuses to say a single word. With its final breath, it snarls, "I'll kill you," before biting its own tongue to end its life. Jaewon sighs. He thought they were weak, but their sheer willpower is actually quite impressive. Looking at the broken antenna in his hand, he piles up a small mound of dirt and sticks it in as a makeshift grave. Rummaging through their remains, Jaewon manages to salvage a small spatial pouch. Luckily, now he has something to store his loot. Ever since escaping the Tower of Nightmares, he hasn't been able to access the system interface. He assumed he'd be able to use a different world's interface, like in some almighty realm, but absolutely nothing is working. Just thinking about that deceitful bastard, B-Strain makes his blood boil. Fortunately, his inspection skill is still functional. To gather info on his loot, he appraises the gems he just acquired before tossing them all into his spatial pouch. But spatial pouches have limits. With too much gear left over, Jaewon has no choice but to discard some of the heavier items. After examining the remaining loot, he realizes none of it is actually useful. Instead, he unfolds a map he found to see where he is. It turns out to be a map of chaos, a location that was completely absent from the information B-Strain had given him. Nearby, another group is out hunting, a red-haired girl, and a few muscular, brutish guys. The girl throws a dagger, but instead of hitting the monster, she accidentally embeds it right into the red-haired guy's knee. Although he's thoroughly annoyed, she's too cute to stay mad at, so he decides to just let it slide. But that wasn't all. The red-haired girl actually went and taunted a two-horned monster, dragging it right toward them. Up high, Jaewon watched the whole thing play out, sizing up the situation. From what he could tell, that red-haired woman seemed to be the strongest of the bunch. He honestly couldn't understand how they managed to clear the nightmare with such low levels and mediocre skills. Meanwhile, the red-haired guy gritted his teeth and unleashed his special skill, Breath of the Fire King, preparing to charge in. But out of nowhere, another dagger flew straight at his face, and the thrower was none other than that red-haired girl. She coyly smirked and said, "Oops, my bad." That red-haired guy was finally pushed past his limit. He snapped, screaming at the top of his lungs, "You rotten-mouthed witch!" The girl acted completely oblivious, calmly pointing ahead and saying, The monster is right in front of you." Just as the beast opened its massive jaws, about to take a chunk out of the red-haired guy, Jaewon lunged forward and brought it down with a single blow. Once the group finished gathering the 10 carcasses of the two-horned monsters, Jaewon decided to tag along with them. The party was still buzzing with excitement over their recent haul of two-horned monsters. Jaewon secretly recalled that the beast he'd taken down earlier with his explosive slash had at least 5 horns, making him realize that the more horns they had, the stronger they got. Meanwhile, the red-haired girl was fuming because her plans had been completely ruined. Nail-biting with frustration, she turned to Jaewon and demanded to know who he was. There was just no way any adapter in Chaos could put down a two-horned monster with a single, simple strike like that. She asked where he came from, but Jaewon just muttered back with a question of his own. "What exactly is Chaos?" The girl froze, unable to believe what she was hearing. Just then, the red-haired guy eagerly stepped in, asking Jae-won for his personal details. Jae-won simply claimed he was just a traveler passing through and couldn't speak the local language. The red-haired girl's mind was still racing, struggling to wrap her head around how Jae-won had taken down that two-horned monster so effortlessly and without even using a single skill. She couldn't even use her inspection skill on him, despite the fact that his willpower registered at the level of a mere non-adapter. Leaning in, she whispered to Jae-won that the number of adapters in Chaos capable of taking down a two-horned monster with a single blow could be counted on one hand. Once again, she asked who he was and where he came from. But Jae-won just repeated his question. What the hell is Chaos anyway? Frustrated, the red-haired girl snapped, genuinely wondering if he even understood a single word she was saying. Jae-won knew what she was trying to get at, but honestly, he didn't even know how to answer the question of who he was. The place he once belonged to, and all the relationships he had back on Earth, had become entirely meaningless the very second he stepped into the tower. In exchange, he had gained new comrades and precious memories, but once the tutorial ended, everyone vanished, like a fleeting illusion. Even though his former comrades were surely living somewhere back on Earth, and his reward was supposedly keeping all those memories, the truth was, since they started over from scratch, they wouldn't remember him or any of their time in the tower. So, Jae-won simply replied, I don't remember a thing. The red-haired girl put on a sympathetic face, but in less than 3 seconds, she was already screaming in his face. Like hell she'd buy that. No matter how deadpan Jae-won acted about having amnesia, it wasn't going to work on her. She absolutely refused to believe it. Jae-won shrugged. Did I ever say I had amnesia? But the red-haired girl just kept grumbling. She asked if he was some sovereign of the Great Lands or something. Jae-won glanced around, his hand reaching for the hilt of his sword and drawing it. He tossed a few smaller swords in for it to chew on. The red-haired girl stared at the weapon, completely speechless, before gasping, a spirit weapon. She convinced herself that Jae-won wasn't actually strong, he just had an incredibly overpowered weapon. But more importantly, the other guys had also noticed the spirit weapon in Jae-won's hands, and greedy thoughts began to stir in their minds. The red-haired girl was worried Jae-won might ruin her mission. But then, a sudden idea popped into her head. She told Jae-won she wouldn't ask who he was anymore, offering him a deal instead. The red-haired girl then introduced herself as Mino, giving him a brief breakdown of Chaos before transitioning the conversation to their party. That red-haired guy's group was actually a ruthless bunch from the Red Fox clan. Jae-won quickly put 2 and 2 together, realizing Mino wanted him to take them out. As darkness began to fall, the red-haired guy suggested they camp there for the night. Traveling in the dark was suicide since they could easily startle the horned monsters. While the group gathered around the campfire to rest, Jae-won just laid back under a tree. According to the map, the village was extremely close. He reached out, catching a few floating particles of light drifting through the air. With his sharp senses, Jae-won could easily overhear the red-haired guys whispering. They were plotting to eliminate him, convinced his strength came solely from his spirit weapon. After all, a spirit weapon was a legendary artifact that could only be obtained in the Great Lands. Jae-won heard every word, fully aware of their malicious intentions. But they would absolutely lose their minds if they knew he had actually pulled this weapon straight from the roots of the illusion tree. According to what that demon said, the tower's gear wasn't really all that impressive, and he didn't think the place he was in was some kind of all-powerful realm. At that moment, the group of thugs began to make their move, but Jae-won remained as still as a statue, completely unbothered. Out of nowhere, Mino burst out in a panic, whispering, "Are you really just gonna lie there? Do something." She grabbed him by the collar, asking if he had that sword that could absorb weapons, urging him to use it to wipe those guys out. But Jae-won just blankly replied that he didn't have one. He already let the red-haired guys borrow it. Apparently, they wanted to check it out during their night watch, leaving the red-haired girl completely speechless. It was unbelievable that Jae-won would actually lend his spirit weapon to someone else for such a stupid reason. Right then, the red-haired gang showed up. They surrounded the two of them, and there was no way they were giving the weapon back to Jae-won. They even promised to put it to good use, claiming that such a powerful sword was just wasted on Jae-won, so the Red Fox clan would kindly take it off his hands. Mino gritted her teeth in fury. These bastards wouldn't learn their lesson until they saw their own graves. Yet, Jae-won didn't even react. He wanted to see Mino's true abilities, so he just stood there. The red-haired group charged at them all at once. Mino threw her daggers, landing consecutive hits right on several men's vital spots. She kicked another one right in the face, sneered, and summoned even more daggers, ready to keep fighting. "I'm already in a pretty bad mood, boys, so every single one of you is going straight to hell." The red-haired man's face darkened. He had already felt suspicious when Mino lured those monsters toward them. Mino really was a ruthless witch. Gritting his teeth, the red-haired man demanded to know who had asked for the Black Vanguard's help. Mino just scoffed without answering and waved her hand. Instantly, a swarm of daggers flew toward the red-haired gang. The Red Fox clan had slaughtered so many non-adapters, people who knew absolutely nothing. Mino was absolutely sure there were countless people in Chaos who wanted them dead, as if the Black Vanguard would ever take action just for those pathetic losers. The red-haired man then pulled out Jaewon's stolen weapon to use it. He was extremely confident that Mino would lose her life here. Mino remained calm, casting a quick glance around to assess the situation. These guys had at least reached the first stage of adaptation. There were as many as 40 of them hiding in the shadows, which was exactly why the red-haired man was so confident about facing the witch of the Black Vanguard and a guy who had killed a two-horned beast with a single blow. He had prepared everything meticulously. If he had known obtaining Jaewon's spirit weapon would be this easy, he wouldn't have gone as far as calling their guild leader. The Black Fox guild leader, Carlton, had already reached the third stage of adaptation. He was several times larger than a normal person, with a mouth full of sharp teeth and a tongue hanging out. More than half of the Black Fox Guild's forces had gathered here just to hunt down Mino. Mino tried to act calm, but deep down, she wasn't sure she could defeat their leader in a one-on-one fight. She turned and called out to Jaewon, pulling a gemstone out of her pocket and throwing it to him. She told him to take it and run, saying she couldn't protect him. Jaewon caught the gemstone, and even though he knew it was the illusion stone, he still asked, "What is this?" Mino told him it was a regression stone, and using it would help the user escape to the nearest fortress. It was the only one she had. Jaewon tightly gripped the gemstone. This thing wasn't meant to send someone back to the past. It was something that could save someone in the present. If only he had this back then. Instead of a useless stone, what would have happened if he could have given this stone to Yoonwon? Jaewon muttered, asking Mino, "If there was a way to go back to the past, would you do it?" Mino couldn't understand if this guy had a loose screw, asking a question like that at a time like this. Mino said she would never do that she would just live her life to the absolute fullest. If she had to die today, then so be it, but she would never go back to the past. Jaewon patted Mino on the shoulder and said, "You're not going to die today." He drew another sword from his waist and charged forward like a flash of lightning, completely tearing through the enemy's formation. The guild leader ordered his men to deploy the 14th Fire King formation, and the rest of them eagerly charged forward. Jaewon didn't even blink. He used his footwork to glide forward, piercing right through the enemy formation and stabbing straight into the guild leader. The leader couldn't block it, and the sword blade pierced right through his iron armor and into his body. Jaewon walked past the guild leader and stopped in front of the red-haired man. Trembling uncontrollably, the red-haired man presented the sword back to him with both hands. Jaewon took back the frost sword. With a gentle thrust, the guys who were trying to run instantly vaporized. Mino froze, her jaw dropping, completely unable to comprehend what had just happened. She had thought Jaewon was just easygoing, assuming he was an idiot who kept his guard completely down. But that wasn't the case at all. Mino had got it all wrong. Jaewon was simply way too strong. Mino repeated her question, demanding to know Jaewon's true identity. Jaewon smirked and said, "You already know who I am. Did you lose your memory? And here I thought I was the only one who did." Mino got annoyed, holding out her hand to demand her regression stone back. But Jaewon casually told her he had dropped it. Mino started throwing a massive fit, unable to believe that Jaewon had lost such an expensive item. Jaewon paid her no mind, walking back to the campfire to continue resting. Mino still didn't give up, relentlessly searching for the regression stone. Jaewon calmly sat down and fed other weapons to his frost dragon sword. Looking into the fire, he mentioned that Mino already knew his identity, he was a human. Mino didn't believe him and slumped to the ground. Jaewon asked her back, "Are you a human?" Mino replied that she was almost a human. Jaewon clenched his fist, murmuring, "That's good enough then," before falling silent again. The atmosphere fell into a deep silence. The next day, the two of them continued on their journey. Mino wasn't giving up just yet. She asked Jaewon, "Do you seriously not remember a single thing about your journey in the Great Lands before you came to Chaos?" Sighing again, Mino said, "Must be nice, not having a single memory. I'm so jealous." Jaewon couldn't wrap his head around that. He asked her, "What's so great about losing your memories anyway?" When he asked how she ended up there, Mino's face suddenly went cold. She warned him, "If you find out the answer to that right now, you'll regret it." The two walked for a while until they reached Gorgon Fortress. Jaewon noticed something that looked exactly like a summoning circle from level 1 of the tutorial. Suddenly, the circle began to glow, and Jaewon froze in shock. Inside it, he could see countless people screaming and crying. Mino sighed and said, "Looks like another bunch of poor bastards just got summoned here." This was the exact same way she had ended up in chaos. Looking at the desperate crowd, a deep sadness washed over Mino. She muttered, "Welcome to the world of the dead. Chaos. If a person dies in the Great Lands, they're sent to chaos. But if you die in chaos, it really is the absolute end. You'll just end up as fertilizer for the tree of imagery." Right at that moment, soldiers started marching out from the fortress. They handed out clothes and ordered the newly summoned people to line up, preparing to take them to the assembly hall. Mino walked over to greet the guard captain, James. He asked her, "What brings you to the northern checkpoint all of a sudden?" Mino didn't give him a straight answer and just asked James to let them through quickly to get things over with, but James refused. He said they'd recently received orders that absolutely anyone entering the fortress had to show their identification. Mino tried a different approach. She leaned in close, batting her eyelashes, and slipped him a horn as a bribe to let them pass. Seeing such a valuable item, James's eyes lit up. He quickly pocketed it, ready to look the other way, but then he turned to Jaewon and demanded his identification. Of course, Jaewon didn't have anything of the sort. Mino playfully held back from helping, telling Jaewon that if he begged her, she might just bail him out. Jaewon completely ignored her. Realizing he wasn't being allowed in, he reached for his sword. Seeing this, Mino panicked and rushed to stop him. Breaking out in a cold sweat, she thought, "Is this guy freaking crazy? Is he seriously about to slaughter the guards?" Terrified of a scenario where Jaewon wiped everyone out with a single slash, Mino frantically jumped in to hold him back. Just as she was about to bribe James again for Jaewon, someone else arrived. The moment he showed up, all the guards immediately fell into a neat line and saluted. He was a famous figure in Gorgon Fortress, known as the captain of the most incorruptible checkpoint in Chaos. The captain of the northern checkpoint, Carlton the Stubborn. He strictly demanded that James explain exactly what was going on. Shaking in his boots, James didn't dare lie. He confessed that Jaewon didn't have any identification but still wanted to enter. Carlton coldly began reciting a list of laws. In the event that an individual is unable to verify their identity, the captain of the northern checkpoint has the full authority to deny entry. This is clearly stated under Section 27, Paragraph 4 of the Gorgon Fortress Entry Regulations. As Carlton spoke, he activated his penal code skill, forcing all the guards and even Mino to their knees. However, the skill had absolutely no effect on Jaewon. With a single swing of his sword, Jaewon shattered the chains around Mino's neck. Carlton had to stop mid-sentence, utterly speechless that someone had easily shattered his penal code. Jaewon calmly asked, "What exactly is written on those identification documents anyway?" Surprisingly, Carlton patiently answered him. A person's identification document must state the name of the organization they belong to, along with other details like their occupation, their primary skills, status conditions, criminal record, and their soul's corruption rate. Jaewon cut Carlton off before he could even finish. He didn't give a damn about that stupid ID, and he sure as hell wasn't going to verify himself. Carlton was still stuck on one question. Why hadn't his penal code worked on him? With a wave of his hand, Carlton cast Silver Prison, reciting yet another set of laws. Under Section 2, Paragraph 6 of the Gorgon Arrest Laws, he was placing Jaewon under arrest. A barrage of iron chains flew toward Jaewon, but with a slight movement, he shattered them effortlessly. The onlookers gasped in sheer disbelief. Jaewon then pointed at Mino and asked, "Can't I just bribe you like she did?" Everyone involved froze in terror, trembling in their boots. Without waiting for an answer, Jaewon tossed a horn toward Carlton, telling him to take it and let him through. Sweating profusely, James screamed at Jaewon, "How dare you try to bribe the captain? You should be executed on the spot." Carlton raised a hand to silence James. Gripping the horn, he flipped his attitude faster than a light switch. Carlton suddenly became incredibly respectful, bowing to Jaewon. "Welcome, messenger of the Nightmare Whisperers." Next, Mino had a soul scanner pressed against her forehead. The scanner showed her corruption rate had exceeded 15%, meaning she needed treatment as soon as possible. Jaewon, on the other hand, had absolutely no clue what soul corruption even was. Soul corruption is a chronic illness that plagues everyone living in chaos. Your soul slowly corrupts just by existing here, and once that corruption peaks, you face execution. Now, it was Jaewon's turn. Carlton pressed the device against Jaewon's head. The scanner came back with an error. His soul corruption level could not be measured. Everyone watching was completely stunned. The screen displayed 0%. Carlton let out a soft chuckle and placed the magic stone back in Jaewon's hand, advising him to never give away something so valuable, so easily. Mino and Jaewon are allowed through the gate. James is completely baffled, wondering why Carlton would just let the two of them go. Carlton asks him in return if he even knows what the spirit stones are used for. He takes off his glove, revealing his hand holding the spirit stone has turned pitch black. Only members of the Greenleaf Society can use these spirit stones. They are the only ones who can handle these crystals and avoid corruption. Even though Jaewon didn't look like one of the Greens, Carlton saw him use the crystal with his own eyes without suffering any side effects. Carlton doesn't necessarily trust Jaewon himself, but he trusts his soul. When Carlton tried to measure Jaewon's soul corruption level earlier, the device threw an error. As far as he knows, that measuring device is never wrong. There is only one scenario where the device fails to measure a soul's corruption, and that's when the soul is purer than anyone else in chaos. Whether Jaewon is one of the Greens or not, they simply need someone who can utilize the spirit stones. The people inside the castle will be the ones to pass judgment on Jaewon. For now, Carlton is done talking about this. Their duty is fulfilled. He immediately turns his attention back to James to interrogate him about the bribe from earlier. Meanwhile, Jaewon and Mino wander through the fortress, finding the layout incredibly complicated. To make matters worse, he has to drag along a brain-dead Mino. Earlier, Carlton had passed judgment on Mino's offense, citing Gorgon Fortress Entry Code Article 7, Section 34. Anyone who doesn't have or fails to provide identification, as well as those who forge documents or use someone else's ID card, may be denied entry or even face severe penalties for their actions. However, Jaewon pleaded for Mino, which is why she was let off the hook. Furthermore, bribery of any form is strictly forbidden under the Gorgon Fortress Entry Code, Article 11, Section 6, which states that anyone who bribes, offers money, or hands over valuable items, along with anyone who accepts them, will be severely punished. Mino is currently completely spaced out from the effects of the decree, left in a dazed state that will take some time to wear off. Jaewon starts asking around for a professional blacksmith to forge his ice dragon sword, completely unaware that someone is watching his every move. After a while, Mino finally snaps back to normal. Still a bit groggy, she has absolutely no idea how or when they even entered the town. Jaewon was just waiting for this moment, so they could go their separate ways, and she'd stop slowing him down. But Mino refuses to let him go. She grits her teeth, rushes after him, and insists on acting as his guide, claiming she knows this place like the back of her hand. Jaewon sighs in defeat and mentions he's looking for a nightmare. As luck would have it, Mino knows exactly where to find one, so she agrees to lead the way. Before they can even take a few steps, they're stopped by another bunch of brainless thugs trying to steal Jaewon's sword. The bandits are a group of 4 brothers, and the youngest, who is absolutely massive, is only 12 years old. He carries his giant axe with fiery determination, following his brothers, leaving Mino completely flabbergasted by the sight. Is a 12-year-old really supposed to be that jacked? The thugs demand his sword, but Jaewon refuses, prompting the giant youngest brother to charge forward with his axe. But with a single swing of Jaewon's sword, the youngest brother's 2 arms are severed, launching him 8 meters away where he lies motionless. If any of you think you're tough enough, step right up. Seeing his little brother get wrecked, the boss loses his mind. All 3 of them charge together to avenge their beloved brother, but of course, they end up utterly defeated. With the thugs now lying motionless on the ground, Mino is stunned to realize Jaewon only uses a single move, a stab that varies between light, medium, and strong. She suddenly remembers someone else who also relied on a single technique, though that person's move was a slash rather than a stab. When Mino asks why his initial attack missed, Jaewon points out he was aiming for the roof. He noticed someone using a stealth skill over there and decided to throw a warning stab just for fun. To him, it was no big deal. Mino is left completely speechless. She eagerly offers to name his signature stabbing move, but he rejects every single one of her suggestions. He doesn't care for flashy names. The two then continue on their way to a place called Twilight's Fall. This forge was established by a nightmare, and it happens to be the largest blacksmith shop in Gorgon. The shop staff member is just an apprentice, who informs them that placing an order today will take some time because the workshop manager is currently away. Only one assistant manager is on duty, but he's also occupied today. If they're looking for something, they'd be better off buying ready-made items instead of placing a custom order. Deep inside, the assistant manager, Michael, and his disciples are crowding around a sword made from the horn of a four-horned beast. Michael pulls out one horn from his belongings and challenges his apprentices, saying that if anyone can carve one hole into this sword, he will hand over his position as assistant manager of Twilight's Fall to them for the day, no matter who they are. The apprentices take turns grabbing their tools to hack and chisel away, but not a single one of them succeeds. Michael sighs, telling them they are far too green and that with hands as weak as noodles, they'll never manage to leave even a single scratch on that horn. Jaewon pushes past the apprentice and steps inside, offering to give it a shot. Michael has no idea who he is, assuming he's just some wandering craftsman. He readily agreed, proudly puffing out his chest. Only someone with his top-tier craftsmanship could handle a horn like this. After all, it was a horn from a four-horned monster, an extremely difficult material to work with. Jaewon walked over to the horn and gave it a gentle poke, piercing right through it. He casually spun it around his finger, acting like he was just the shop's assistant for the day. But the horn couldn't even hold together for 3 seconds before shattering to pieces, right before everyone's shocked eyes. Michael lost his mind with rage, screaming and grabbing Jaewon by the collar. That horn was worth a fortune. A four-horned monster's horn is incredibly rare, so how on earth were they going to explain this to the clients who ordered it? Jaewon promised to compensate them with a much better horn, but Michael wasn't buying it. How could a beggar like Jaewon possibly have anything better than a four-horned monster's horn? But then, Jaewon reached into his pocket and pulled out a horn from Ganak, a five-horned monster, and handed it to Michael. He handed it over to the master as compensation, since he didn't have a four-horned horn on him at the moment. Holding the ultra-rare horn in his hands, Michael's eyes lit up with excitement. He immediately ordered his apprentices to close up the shop. Since Jaewon was now the assistant, he could freely use all the equipment and staff today. Seeing that things had settled down, Mino left Jaewon to his business and headed out to take care of some of her own errands. Michael couldn't help but ask how Jaewon managed to get a five-horned monster's horn. Shrugging off his coat, Jaewon casually replied that he hunted it himself. Michael was speechless. Soloing a five-horned monster was unheard of. People with that kind of power were incredibly rare in all of Chaos. Putting on an apron, Jaewon mentioned that he needed a scabbard, but admitted he had never made one before. Michael stared at him, wondering if he had misheard. Using Ganak's horn just to make a scabbard? How insane must his sword be? Jaewon then drew the Ice Dragon sword. When Michael took it, he assumed it was just a replica. Replicas were rare since they were crafted by nightmares, but Michael suggested Jaewon should forge a brand new sword instead, despite how beautiful this copy looked. Suddenly, the sword in Michael's hand began to violently tremble, startling him so badly that he dropped it. The sword literally opened its mouth and bit into the five-horned monster's horn. Michael broke into a cold sweat. Feeling its spiritual energy, he realized this sword contained the soul of an elite race. After devouring the horn, the Ice Dragon sword began to show signs of evolution. Looking at its rapidly changing appearance, this was no ordinary upgrade, it was a major evolution. Once the process was complete, Jaewon would have to give it a brand new name, as spirit swords lose their original names after a major evolution. Jaewon scolded the sword, warning it that if it kept eating without permission, he would rename it the Pig Sword. Pulling out yet another horn, Jaewon handed it to Michael, wanting to see how he refined materials into custom shapes. Being put on the spot by someone so powerful left Michael feeling immense pressure. Determined not to disappoint, Michael decided to show him the true craftsmanship of the Twilight Blacksmith of Gorgon Fortress. Meanwhile, Castle Commander Carlton Javier was sipping tea while listening to a report from his subordinate, the very same stealth agent Jaewon had spotted earlier. The agent hadn't even realized what hit him until he woke up unconscious on a rooftop. Naturally, he had completely lost track of Jaewon. The commander pondered. To detect a third-stage adapter in stealth, this mysterious target had to be at least a fifth-stage adapter. He ordered his men to deploy more scouts and search every single corner of the city until they found him. The scouts saluted and left. Carlton let out a heavy sigh, feeling a massive headache coming on. Clenching his fists, he silently prayed that the Castellan could hold on just a little longer. Meanwhile, at a nearby tavern, a large screen was broadcasting a video of a mysterious youth clearing the 99th floor entirely on his own, with his face blurred out. The patrons whispered among themselves, wondering what had happened to him. Rumor had it that he had abandoned his duties and run away. Most people dismissed the footage as a total fake. After all, how could anyone clear the first-generation tower all by themselves? Just then, the door swung open, and Mino hesitantly stepped inside. Her stunning looks immediately drew everyone's attention as she walked over and sat down at the bar. A drunk guy tried to slide over and hit on her, but Mino shut him down with a glare so terrifying he didn't dare say another word. Feeling frustrated, she ordered a drink and knocked it back. Once the alcohol kicked in, Mino started venting about Jaewon to Claire, the tavern owner. He was giving her such a massive headache. Claire let out a sigh, telling her to stop drinking herself to sleep and pointing out that she could have any guy she wanted, so why obsess over just one? But Mino was still incredibly annoyed. Just thinking about Jaewon made her blood boil. He just goes around breaking everything, swinging his sword without a single care for the rules of this place, and babbling all kinds of weird nonsense. Mino looked down sadly. Jaewon made her feel utterly insignificant. Everyone here worked so hard just to survive. Yet he crawled out of nowhere, looking down on them as if they belonged to completely different worlds. And every time she saw that look on his face, it drove her absolutely crazy. Claire patted her head gently, advising her to stay far away from Jaewon. Getting mixed up with a guy like that was a one-way ticket to an early grave. Right on cue, a golden carrier pigeon flew inside, dropping a letter from Carlton right into Mino's hand. Instantly, she got a terrible feeling about this. She was just about to open it and take a look when someone snuck up right behind her. Mino gasped in shock, quickly pulling out her weapon to strike, but the intruder instantly grabbed her by the wrist, locking her hand in place. He gave Mino a sharp glare. It was not that he disliked getting physical, but he was busy today, so he decided to save the fight for another time. He asked Mino to do him a quick favor. Meanwhile, Megan was thrown onto the cold ground, landing hard. He stared at the five-horned monster right in front of him, trembling all over. How on earth was he supposed to forge a sword out of something like this? How could a sword even transform into this? Jaewon grabbed him by his collar, lifting him up, and barked at him to snap out of it. They were right in the middle of the refining process. If you are going to help, then do it right. Megan panted heavily, completely giving up. He could not do this anymore. He could not even bring himself to touch the damn thing. This horn was just on a whole different level, way beyond his refining skills. Seeing his panic, Jaewon placed his hand over the old man's eyes. It is not about your level, it is about your perception. Right then, Megan awakened the first stage, doubt, a power that shatters true essence by questioning the world itself. As Jaewon pulled his hand away, Megan awakened the second stage, understanding, the power to see through a corrupted world. Trembling, Megan looked back at the horn. Suddenly, a thick black liquid splattered everywhere, revealing a five-horned monster with its long tongue dripping. Megan cursed out loud, stumbling backward and falling all over himself. Jaewon snapped impatiently. Hey, you said you would help me, so do it right. But Megan was shaking so badly he could not even stand up. The monster's true form was absolutely horrifying. Had he really been using his basic amateur skills on a monstrosity like this? Megan desperately tried to convince himself that this was all just a dream. He frantically looked around, then bolted toward the door, desperate to wake up from this nightmare. Jaewon sighed and clicked his tongue, but he did not do anything to stop him. Megan slammed the door open, screaming for help. But on the other side of the door was a horrifying pile of skulls, staring back, making him freeze right in his tracks. Megan stood there, completely paralyzed with fear. The skulls whispered, demanding, "Is he done refining yet?" The ignorant have no right to look upon this place. Megan shook violently, his eyes wide with horror. He wondered, how could someone like him even survive in a messed up world like this? Why did he have to die in a place like this? Meanwhile, Jaewon was fighting off the beast entirely on his own. In no time at all, the young man brought the monster down. Megan cried out in absolute despair, tears and snot streaming down his face as he sat there in a daze, muttering to himself. Some things in this world are just completely pointless, no matter how many times you try, like a mere mortal trying to match the craftsmanship of a nightmare, or trying to surpass the boundaries of nature itself. Megan was simply too old to handle the Horn of Garnak. Lighting up a cigarette, the old blacksmith fell completely silent, a stark contrast to his loud behavior earlier. Gone was all his arrogance and boasting. After all, Jaewon had not come here looking for him, he was looking for the master of the nightmare smithy. The master had not stepped foot outside in ages, but he was the only one who could help Jaewon right now. But the old man was just too pathetic. Jaewon did not really care though, and told Megan straight up, "All I need is a scabbard, so just keep going." But Megan shook his head and refused. He insisted he had tried more than enough. Jaewon did not buy it, telling him that he could easily do it if he just tried 100 million times. Megan let out a dry chuckle. "Ah, the confidence of youth. It might look like I am not trying in your eyes, kid, but I really have given it everything I have got." He had been trying his absolute best while watching Jaewon work, whether the kid believed him or not. Megan had mastered every single skill related to blacksmithing and forging. At this point, he could confidently say he could repair any weapon in Nightmare with a 99% success rate. But after achieving that level of mastery, Megan had a realization. Maybe he was not actually aiming for that 99% success rate. Maybe he was just desperately running away from the 1% chance of failure. Jaewon stood up. He acknowledged that Megan worked harder than anyone else, but then he asked if the old man actually understood the underlying principles of refinement skills. Megan scoffed and said of course he did. The refinement skills of a nightmare are fundamental. They are primal forces, existing since the very beginning of time, just like fire and water. How could a mere human explain the very origin of the world? And even if they could, what would be the point of explaining something like that anyway? But Jaewon countered, pointing out that Megan was using a skill without even understanding what he was actually doing. Megan remained silent, slowly putting out the cigarette in his hand. Hearing Jaewon's words, Megan muttered that the basic concept was simply channeling spirit power into the hammer and chisel, then controlling that force to suppress the horn. He then gestured toward his disciples. If the principle is really that simple, then why can't any of these guys use refinement skills? Megan froze, speechless. If the logic behind this skill is so basic, then even if they haven't officially learned it, shouldn't they still be able to recreate the same effect? Panic setting in, Megan whipped around and demanded to know if Jaewon actually knew the secret principle behind refinement. Jaewon admitted he did not know at first, but he had recently figured it out. He gently touched the horn, and instantly, its outer shell liquefied and dissolved into a shimmering gold dust. He then told the onlookers to take a closer look and tell him exactly what they saw. Megan stared at the separating golden particles. All his lifetime of extreme effort had only served to condense the heavy walls of the world he was allowed to see. There was absolutely nothing wrong with working hard. If he still could not achieve anything after putting in all that blood, sweat, and tears, then he was not the failure. The world itself was. It was as if a sudden realization hit Megan like a truck. Memories of his past, back when he was just a young, wide-eyed apprentice, came rushing back to him. He did not understand how he had ruined everything. The method he was using belonged to nightmares, not humans. There was no method for humans. As a human, it was impossible to rise above the level of a novice crafter. Megal had once tried to push past human limits to become like a nightmare, but he still failed. He was in utter despair, not knowing what to do. Rebel against the world? This is a realistic world, where humans only get results that match the effort they put in. What is so wrong with getting used to this place? Jaewon continued to open Megal's eyes, telling him that this world was deceiving him. He could not do the things he was actually capable of. He might be old, but he was still capable of fighting. Jaewon encouraged Megal, telling him to look closer at the horn and stop relying on the system. Instead, he should see it with his own eyes. Megal followed his advice and looked deeper. He saw a vision of Jaewon rushing swiftly ahead. He wondered, did Jaewon always live his life seeing the world like this? A world with no skills or interfaces, a transparent world with no exceptions. How could anyone live that way unless they were completely insane? Megal tightly gripped the chisel in his hand. He let out a shout and swung his hammer down. Jaewon left the twilight, asking Mino why she was following him. "Are you scheming something again?" Mino walked up to him, half-jokingly saying she planned to kill him. Jaewon did not react at all, indifferently asking, "What would you gain by trying to kill me? A life of luxury with all the spirit stones I own?" Mino shoved a bundle of clothes into his chest, telling him to take it. She said she did not want to use other people's things for free. Mino then asked what he planned to do next if he could not meet the nightmares. Megal had already shown him the way to find them. "I will meet them, ask about the Tree of Imagery, and find a way to the abyss," he replied. Mino could not understand why Jaewon would do such a thing. Even if Jaewon got lucky and managed to reach the abyss, the powerful figures ruling the abyss would not just sit idly by. "You will not be able to return," Jaewon replied. "I am not coming back." Mino was stunned, then suddenly lost her temper. She screamed, "How dare you do something so earth-shattering? What gives you the right to just do whatever you want without caring about what anyone else thinks?" Mino ranted on and on, unable to stomach the fact that Jaewon did not even view the people here as human beings. She and the others here were human too. Even if they were not as strong or brave as him, they were definitely still human. Jaewon stared at Mino. He could read her mind. Someone was threatening her. Mino could not break the agreement. If she did, the hostage would not survive. She had to lure him and take him somewhere. Jaewon blinked, realizing what was going on. He could even sense the guy watching them from across the street. He was one of them. Would he have to risk his life here just to save a hostage? How meaningless. Even if he saved the people here over and over again, the truth would not change. What was right in front of his eyes showed the reality of this world. This world was controlled by figures of wealth and information, and by those who sold their souls for higher pay. He would use his time to eliminate that watcher and go find the nightmares. Mino grabbed Jaewon's shirt and screamed, "From now on, we go our separate ways. How on earth could I ever work with someone like you?" With that, Mino stormed off, leaving Jaewon standing there in a daze. Now, he actually thought she looked quite human. He kept monitoring the movements of the people hiding in the shadows. They would head back to report. The plan to draw out the nightmares had failed. After parting ways in an argument, Mino returned to the tavern. She pushed the door open, only to find the tables and chairs inside, smashed to pieces. A group of men was waiting inside. They had taken Claire, the tavern owner, hostage. The leader was an elder from the Gyumshan clan, the eldest of the Janya brothers. He glared at Mino and asked, "Why are you here alone? What about our deal?" Mino summoned a flurry of daggers. Determined to fight back, she threw them straight at the group. The elder's men used shadow arts. A crowd of black shadow figures rushed forward to attack Mino. She skillfully dodged their strikes, but failed to evade the slash of the elder himself. Wounded, Mino collapsed to her knees. The elder looked down at her with utter contempt. Since there was a soundproof barrier around the place, nobody would ever know what was happening inside. "Cut out the useless screaming and bring that guy here." The elder yanked Claire up by her hair and snapped, "Mino, stop playing tricks." They knew there was not a single dark soldier inside the Gorgon fortress, so she should not hope for any reinforcements. By the time anyone came looking, Mino and Claire would have long turned into dried corpses. Mino still did not give up. Using the 7 daggers of Akaram, she threw all of them right at the elder. But with just a single swing of his sword, he easily shattered Mino's daggers. Mino got absolutely wrecked by the elder. At that moment, Jaewon's question flashed through her mind. If there was a way to go back to the past, would she do it? Mino was in utter despair, waiting for her death. She wanted to go back. She wanted to live. If she had followed him, would she have been able to witness the fall of this world? Just as the elder's blade was about to come down, a powerful force stopped it. They say the main character always arrives at the last second. Sure enough, Jaewon showed up like an absolute legend. He tossed the bundle of clothes back to Mino, complaining that none of them fit. Seeing their target finally show up, the elder and his men grinned triumphantly. "The spirit stone is here. This just got a whole lot easier." Jaewon pointed his sword at them and asked, "Excuse me, is the nightmare here? Bring it to me." The gang stared at him like he was some kind of freak. Is this guy insane? He is called the Fortress Rebel, and it seems the rumors were spot on. Mino struggled to her feet and warned Jaewon to be careful. That guy is a stage 1 adapter, a very high rank, so don't underestimate him. Jaewon couldn't care less because there was no way he was going to lose. Angered by his arrogance, the group didn't hesitate any longer and lunged at him. Jaewon raised his sword and threw a testing thrust. The elder tilted his head to dodge the blow. They immediately became more cautious. Jaewon wasn't an adapter, but he could be one of those holding the power of the abyss. Jaewon observed them, thinking to himself that up until now, the only creature that had ever dodged his full power strike was the 5-horned beast. This meant a stage 4 adapter might be on the same level as that monster. This fight was shaping up to be intense, but he didn't care. He was going to take them all down anyway. The enemies resorted to dirty tricks and used the hostage to threaten him, shouting, "Come on then, make a move." Claire didn't care about her own safety. She screamed at the two of them to just attack. But before she could finish, one of the thugs shut her up with a brutal slap across the face. Mino panicked, telling Claire to hang on. She then turned to Jaewon, begging him to save her friend. Gripping his ice dragon sword, Jaewon didn't understand why Mino was begging him. He had only come here to find the nightmare, and his plan was simply to obliterate everything in his way, regardless of whether they were enemies or hostages. Mino tightly grabbed Jaewon's shirt, pleading with him to save Claire because she was a human being too. Jaewon froze as a memory flashed before his eyes. He saw Claire, full of resolve, screaming for him to go ahead and attack. Gritting his teeth, Jaewon raised his sword and fired a blast into the sky. The beam of blue light shooting straight up instantly caught the attention of the military. Carlton. Since Jaewon had broken the barrier, the tavern was quickly surrounded. Carlton walked in from outside, asking what was going on. Jaewon pointed at the elder and his men, accusing them of breaking the law. He didn't know the exact details, but he guessed they were violating Gorgon criminal law, Chapter 276, Clause 4, or something like that. Jaewon even shamelessly played the victim, framing the group by claiming they planned to use the tavern as a base to destroy the world by conspiring with nightmares. Carlton understood the situation and recited a series of statutes. Based on Gorgon criminal law, Chapter 174, Clause 4, and Chapter 124, Clause 6, for the crimes of unlawful destruction of private property within the fortress and kidnapping a resident, the elder and his men were to be arrested immediately without a warrant. Realizing the tables had turned, the elder prepared to make a run for it. But Carlton wasn't about to let him slide. He launched his silver chains, instantly binding the elder's two lackeys. Still refusing to back down, the elder lunged at Carlton. Carlton summoned an axe, blocking the incoming blade with enough force to crack it. The elder leaped back to build up momentum, preparing to strike again. Carlton quickly used his silver chains to bind both of the elder's hands, stripping away his ability to resist and forcing him to collapse to the ground and surrender. But the stubborn old man still had a trick up his sleeve. He pulled out a hidden object and tossed it behind Carlton. A sphere burst open, releasing a cloud of toxic smoke. Taking advantage of the chaos, the three of them bolted out of the tavern. One of them inhaled the toxic gas and passed out. Waiting for them outside was the elder of the Forbidden Heaven Society, the demon of lust, Hyuk Sarang. He asked, "Is the wicked witch really that hard to handle?" He demanded that they capture her alive and hand her over to him. The elders group quickly explained that it wasn't just the wicked witch in there, but also a real pain in the neck who used chains. Supporting Mino, Jaewon kicked the door open and thrust his sword straight toward the tree where the group was hiding. They couldn't believe he was still standing after inhaling that toxic smoke. But this time, with the demon of lust backing them up, Jaewon had to face all three of them on his own. Jaewon slammed the horn into the ground. He really didn't want to resort to this, since relying on an item's skill was honestly a bit embarrassing. But the moment the horn pierced the earth, a terrifying aura of pure evil erupted. Terrified by the overwhelming pressure, the elder and his lackey literally wet themselves, their knees buckling as they collapsed to the dirt. Seeing that things had gone completely south, the demon of lust immediately turned tail and ran, leaving his men to fend for themselves. The elder glared furiously at his two subordinates lying there, completely motionless. Gritting his teeth, he couldn't believe things had ended up this way. Jaewon stepped right up to the old man and offered him a way to save his own skin. He demanded to know where the nightmare was hiding. The elder clenched his jaw, refusing to utter a single word. He knew that even if he talked and managed to survive this, it wouldn't matter. If that person found out, he was as good as dead anyway. But even without a word, Jaewon could read his mind loud and clear. Realizing this, the elder pulled out a spirit stone and bit right into it. Normally, no sane person would ever consume a spirit stone. They didn't want their souls corrupted, and they certainly didn't want to die. But the moment the elder bit into it, his body began to mutate. He warped into a massive, writhing, grotesque monster, immediately lashing out at the innocent bystanders nearby. Clinging to the last shreds of his sanity, the elder could finally see the true nature of this world. Why did he ever care about dignity in a world like this? What had he even been so terrified of? Now, he was finally, truly free. Why hadn't he done this sooner? But a sudden shiver ran down his spine when he felt Jaewon staring at him. Roaring, the monster swung its massive arms straight at him. He couldn't stand the thought of a mere human existing in his world. Jaewon calmly locked his eyes on the mutated elder, sizing him up. Even with his appraisal skill, the creature's identity came up as unknown. But it didn't matter anymore. Jaewon raised his blade and drove it straight into the beast. The monster's head was severed instantly, rolling across the ground. As the elder's body began to disintegrate into dust, Jaewon sheathed his sword and turned away. He needed to search the ruins of the bar to find anyone who might know where the nightmare was hiding. That was when he spotted Mino, curled up in a corner, screaming at him to stay back. Nearby, Carlton was in no better shape, clinging to life with severe wounds. Mino grabbed Jaewon's shirt with trembling hands, begging him to kill her while she was still herself. A dark, ominous mist began to wrap around Mino's body. Stunned, Jaewon pulled her into a tight embrace. In his eyes, she was human now. He didn't understand why he always doubted her, or why he couldn't bring himself to keep up that cold suspicion anymore. Jaewon's hand slowly gripped the hilt of his sword. After all, on the path he had chosen, emotions were nothing but a luxury he couldn't afford. He couldn't hesitate. But just as he was about to draw his blade, Claire grabbed his hand, pleading that it wasn't too late, and they could still be saved. Mino and Carlton were rushed to the medical tent, but the healers could only shake their heads in despair. There was nothing they could do if the corruption continued to eat away at them. Suddenly, the Gorgon defensive network blared with a frantic emergency siren. Ghouls had breached the fortress. Panic erupted as citizens fled in every direction, screaming for their lives. Dozens of citizens had already turned, tearing through the streets and slaughtering everyone in sight. Sitting by Mino's side, Claire spoke softly to Jaewon, mentioning how often Mino had talked about him. She said he judged the world purely on his own terms, while stubbornly clinging to his humanity. Claire knew his type all too well. She had seen people like him before. Humans didn't end up in this miserable place out of stupidity. They did it because they had no other choice. It wasn't a lack of courage, but what were they even fighting for? Noble ideals? Fighting for justice? Claire figured Jaewon was exactly that kind of starry-eyed idealist. She couldn't wrap her head around his way of thinking, mostly because she lacked that kind of courage herself. But she knew one thing for sure. Jaewon was a dangerous man, and he had to leave. He gave people hope just by existing, and if he stayed, that hope would only crush them with even deeper despair. Jaewon fell silent. His mind drifted back to his old comrades, to the countless lives lost along the way, and then back to Mino. Nearby, Carlton's condition was rapidly deteriorating. They were desperately grinding down demonic horns to purify his body, but nothing was working. The corruption was spreading, completely unstoppable. Jaewon marched over, grabbed Carlton by the collar, and slapped him twice to force him awake. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Carlton slowly opened his heavy eyes, but his plea was the exact same as Mino's. He begged Jaewon to end his life. Jaewon was the only one he trusted to do it. Even on the brink of death, Carlton's stubborn nature wouldn't quit, as he weakly mumbled the fortress laws. According to the special laws of Gorgon, Article 1, Section 4, anyone who is corrupted must be eliminated. Jaewon's grip on Carlton's collar tightened in frustration. This idiot and his stubborn loyalty. If he had just a few men like Carlton back then, he wouldn't have been trapped in that godforsaken tower for 45 years. A cold system warning chimed in his head. Soul corruption had reached 94%. Ghoul transformation was imminent. Suddenly, the tent flap flew open, and Commander Chung-Hu of the 1st Anti-Demon Squad marched inside. As an S-rank awakened, Chung-Hu didn't hesitate. He drew his weapon, coldly reciting the code. Under Gorgon's special laws, Article 1, Section 4, he was authorized to immediately execute Mino and Carlton, the northern checkpoint commander. But as his blade swung down, Jaewon blocked it barehanded. Chung-Hu glared at him, warning him to step aside so he could do his job. If a level 5 traveler turned into a ghoul, it would unleash an absolute catastrophe upon the fortress. They had to stop it before it was too late. But right before their eyes, Jaewon pulled out the horn of a Garnak, leaving everyone in the room stunned. He crushed the horn into a powder and forced it down Carlton and Mino's throats. But Mino's body was already far too weak, and her transformation was accelerating rapidly. The soul's corruption level has exceeded 95%. The morphing process will start soon, and there is no stopping her transformation now. Just as Carlton was about to draw his sword and strike Mino down, Claire rushed in to stop him. In a state of sheer panic, she begged them to call Chung-Hu, the doctor of despair, saying he could use his dead man slash to cut away the corruption. Claire was quickly held back by the guards. Carlton refused to call the doctor, arguing that Chung-Hu was currently handling a critical matter in the inner city and couldn't possibly be summoned here for something so trivial. Carlton told Jaewon to step aside, warning him that he couldn't back down this time. Jaewon's face darkened. Drawing his sword, he calmly stated that he would be the one to end Mino's life, as she had personally asked him to do so. Ignoring Claire's non-stop screaming, Jaewon pointed the tip of his blade toward Mino. Suddenly, a brilliant wave of golden light burst forth. Before Jaewon's eyes was a vast, blinding white space. An old man with snow-white hair and a long beard was sitting right next to Mino, and upon seeing Jaewon, he jumped back in shock. Meanwhile, Jaewon tried using his appraisal skill to inspect the old man, but it was completely useless. Believing this old man was the root cause of the corruption, Jaewon thought Mino might survive if he killed him. Acting on instinct, he swung his sword, charging straight at the old man. The old man drew his own sword to defend himself, but his blade shattered instantly. Heartbroken over his ruined weapon, the old man leapt backward out of the white space. This old man was none other than Chung-he, the Doctor of Despair. Carlton was stunned to see him, wondering why on earth he was here instead of leading the fortress. "Why are you here?" Carlton muttered. But Chung-he didn't give a damn about any of that. A beautiful lady was on the verge of dying right here, so of course he had to save her. Who cared about the fortress at a time like this? Chung-he then pointed directly at Jaewon's face and yelled, "You damn brat. Because of you, my dead man slash was completely ruined." He explained that the dead man slash could only be executed with a sword made from a trihorn or something even better. Suddenly, Chung-he's gaze locked onto the sword hanging from Jaewon's waist. His eyes lit up, and he began circling around Jaewon, eyeing the blade with intense curiosity. Stopping him in his tracks, Jaewon asked if Mino could be saved if he lent him the sword. Chung-he confidently declared that it was a 10 billion% guarantee. Without hesitation, Jaewon handed over his sword. As Chung-he grasped the hilt, he trembled with pure joy, sensing a deeply mysterious energy from a weapon that felt exactly like its master. Chung-he swung the sword a few times, conjuring a brilliant flow of white light. But after only a brief moment, the old man ran out of breath and collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted and gasping for air due to a severe lack of soul energy. The world Chung-he had constructed began to crumble, but he simply didn't have the strength to stand back up. Jaewon took his sword back. Knowing what the young man was planning, Chung-he warned him against it, saying that since Jaewon hadn't even fully entered his world, there was no way he could copy his dead man slash. Gripping his sword tightly, Jaewon replied, "I'm not slicing it, I'm just copying it." Chung-he tried his best to stop him, but he couldn't. Gritting his teeth, Jaewon held the sword firmly and began to draw. This was the very first time he had raised his sword to save someone. Staring ahead silently, Jaewon recalled Mino. She was such a stubborn fool. Even though she was an assassin, she was incredibly fragile deep down, fiercely loyal, and far too trusting. Jaewon made one final stroke, completing his drawing. Slowly, Mino began to open her eyes, her decay started to recede, and the morphing process came to a complete halt. Claire rushed over in tears, crying hysterically as she checked on Mino. Jaewon remained quiet, showing no emotion at all. Chung-he praised him, saying, "Looks like your narrow worldview has broadened a bit. Your mind just went from a 5-year-old to a 10-year-old. He noted that Jaewon being able to use the dead man slash was highly unusual, as it wasn't a skill that any ordinary adapter could easily copy. In this case, it was highly likely that Jaewon was also an awakener. Awakeners are abnormal existences who can bypass the rules of the system. They are a small fraction of humanity who obtain powerful, miraculous abilities by rejecting the simulation. Awakeners possess a level of power, great enough to completely overturn the balance of power in chaos, and even across the entire Great Lands, very few people are ever referred to as awakeners." Carlton suddenly became anxious. Chung-he had mentioned before that if someone else could use the dead man slash, they might be able to save the fortress master. Just then, someone walked into the tent. Dressed head to toe in pitch-black armor, he was the captain of the Shadow Guards. As a level 5 adapter, the Shadow Captain walked right past everyone else and knelt respectfully before Jaewon, greeting him as the special envoy of the Blue Pyrite Flower Society. He then invited Jaewon inside the fortress. Jaewon was escorted to meet the fortress master, Yurhen. After a brief introduction, they got straight to business. The commander asked Jaewon point blank if he was the special envoy of the Blue Pyrite Flower Society, but Jaewon denied it without blinking an eye. Chung-he questioned why Jaewon possessed the magic stones, since they served as proof of identity for members of the Blue Pyrite Flower Society. If he wasn't a member, how could he have gotten them? And more importantly, how could he use them without corrupting his soul? Jaewon simply replied that he had just picked them up after killing their previous owners, who were now dead. Carlton jumped to his feet in disbelief, wondering who would dare harm members of the 6 major societies. Jaewon explained that those pests were the ones who wanted to pick a fight with him first. "They wanted to steal my horns, so I beat them up," Jaewon said. Understanding the situation, The fortress master noted that the Blue Pyrite Flower Society was extremely greedy for resources, so a fight was bound to happen. He then asked Jaewon to tell them more about what had happened since his arrival in Chaos. After a long, deep conversation, the leader set down his teacup. Jaewon happened to stumble into something that dragged him to Chaos, accidentally got his hands on a magic stone of the Greenleaf clan, and made his way into the fortress. Then, by some crazy coincidence, he got caught up in a riot and ran into Chung-Hoo. Then, he actually pulled off the Miracle Doctor's Fiend Slash, a technique he had only seen once. Chung-Hoo couldn't believe the fortress leader actually bought Jaewon's story. Had he lost his mind after the Castellan went missing? The leader just smiled, completely brushing off Chung-Hoo's complaints. He turned back to Jaewon and asked, "Is your physical body still alive?" Jaewon was taken aback. Instead of playing the main game, he had escaped the nightmare. Right now, he was only here in spirit form. The Tree of Illusions must have mistaken him for an envoy and sent him to Chaos. If it was his real body, it would definitely still be breathing oxygen back on Earth. Jaewon shot back at the leader. "How do you know I'm not dead yet?" From everything Jaewon had said, the leader could easily deduce that he was still alive. After all, nobody describes their own death in such a casual way. Jaewon clearly had his reasons for keeping his identity hidden, so he neither confirmed nor denied it. He didn't want to talk about it. The leader tapped his fingers on the table, admitting that he actually owed Jaewon an apology. For over 4 days, his subordinates had been tailing Jaewon. But Jaewon already knew that the guy on the roof whom Jaewon had given a warning stab was one of the leader's men. Jaewon's power was way beyond anything they had anticipated, making it incredibly difficult to keep tabs on him. Still, it wasn't a total waste of time. The leader projected all the investigation data they'd gathered on Jaewon over the past few days. Danger level, SS class, combat power, undetermined. Estimated financial damage, approximately 380 million. Hearing this, even Chung-Hoo couldn't help but yell, "You absolute psycho. I don't know if he's a hero or a criminal. Whatever he is, he's definitely not human." Leader Yurin burst out laughing, saying, "Some might call Jaewon a hero, while others might think he's insane. I'm sure people will have all kinds of names for him. But as for himself, he preferred to call people like Jaewon the main character." The main character? Jaewon didn't have a clue what he was talking about. Was this a webtoon or something? What was this talk about main and side characters? Besides, main characters are usually famous, but Jaewon wasn't famous at all, which meant some powerful force was intentionally suppressing any information about him. And they certainly didn't seem friendly. After all, if they were pulling his strings from the shadows, he wouldn't be struggling so much just to get some basic identification papers. Yurin assumed Jaewon was a main character who had fled to Chaos just to escape this mysterious faction. Jaewon fell silent, lost in thought. A faction backing him? He wasn't sure, but it could be the Dark Monarch, one of the 12 monarchs of the Great Land. He wondered just how powerful these so-called monarchs really were. Yurin assured him that he wouldn't pry into Jaewon's identity. They also wouldn't hold him responsible for the damage he caused, and Gorgon Fortress would protect him. Jaewon asked in return, "Is this fortress strong enough to stand against the 12 monarchs of the Great Land?" Yurin immediately understood where he was coming from, and confidently assured him that it was. Monarchs aren't allowed to directly interfere with whatever happens in Chaos. Gorgon would do anything for Jaewon, but in exchange, he had to help them with one thing, saving their Castellan. 2 hours later, the captain of the Black Guard led Jaewon down to the basement. Right now, Mino and Carlton were recovering in the infirmary, while they were heading down to the training grounds. Chung-Hoo was absolutely determined to see whose move was stronger, Jaewon's stab or his own slash. Chung-Hoo offered a deal. If Jaewon could defeat him, he would answer any question Jaewon wanted. He was incredibly confident, believing it was absolutely impossible for him to lose. The two clashed for a bit, and Chung-Hoo ended up getting hammered deep into the ground. He demanded a rematch, but Jaewon just sighed and said, "The result is already clear. Let's just stop here." Chung-Hoo was too stubborn to give up, insisting that he hadn't even used his ultimate technique yet. He claimed that if he actually unleashed it, Jaewon would definitely be dead, so he was just holding back. Jaewon was completely speechless. How many times was this old man going to repeat that? Shouting from the bottom of the pit, Chung-Hoo asked Jaewon how old he was. Jaewon estimated he was about 60. Chung-Hoo yelled back in frustration, bragging that he was already 1,000 years old. He complained that a kid who had only practiced stabbing for 60 years could never beat someone like him, who had been slashing for 1,000. But even though Chung-He had been practicing his slash for 1,000 years, to Jae-won, it looked like he had only been doing it for 1 year. His pride deeply wounded, Chung-Hu lunged out of the pit, drawing his sword to slash at him once again. Jae-won raised his own sword to counter, and as their blades clashed, Jae-won was pushed back slightly. Intrigued by Jae-won's style, Chung-Hu asked what his technique was called. Jae-won casually replied, "Normal stab?" The name left Chung-Hu utterly speechless. With a name like that, who on earth would ever think it was an insanely powerful technique? Jae-won gripped his sword tightly, preparing his stance for an even more powerful thrust. Chung-Hu stood frozen. In his eyes, the man standing before him was no longer the usual Jae-won, but the absolute sole king of chaos. He knew he would never forget the sheer terror of facing this king for as long as he lived. Cold sweat began to pour down Chung-Hu's face. He didn't think he could ever cut through something like that. Even if it wasn't quite on the level of the Soul King, it was still an incredibly devastating attack. Jae-won lowered his stance to build momentum, preparing to lunge forward, when Chung-Hu suddenly stopped him. Meanwhile, in the Great Lands, within the 5th region known as the Steel region, the imperturbable Lord of Steel, Hu-Hyu, listened to his subordinate report that the Lord of Darkness was making moves in chaos. Hu-Hyu frowned. Aren't all the lords of the Great Lands bound by a covenant that forbids them from interfering in chaos? Feeling the intense pressure, the subordinate bowed his head and gestured for Hu-Hyu to look at the screen. On the screen, there was a video of a certain young man clearing the 99th floor all by himself. Hu-Hyu was confused. Isn't this video fake? The product shown in this video is actually linked to the Lord of Darkness, who rules the 9th region. After refusing to complete the tutorial, the young man in the video broke through the ceiling of the tower and carried the product away with him, and his whereabouts are still unknown. Hu-Hyu couldn't believe his ears. But wasn't there a demon guarding the 100th floor? Yes, but that demon was completely wiped out. Then, Hu-Hyu received more intel. The Lord of Darkness had actually been interfering in chaos for a very long time. One of the 10 clans in chaos had been in constant communication with the Lord of Darkness. Hu-Hyu pondered for a moment before ordering his subordinate to send a message to chaos. He summoned 10 first-class elite golden warriors and a level 5 high-ranking traveler. He wanted to go and see for himself what was happening. Thinking of chaos, Hu-Hyu couldn't help but worry about Chung-Hu. That old man could have lived a very long life if he weren't so brutally honest. Hu-Hyu hoped Chung-Hu was doing okay. Meanwhile, Jae-won was running Chung-Hu ragged to the point of exhaustion. Yet, the stubborn old man still refused to back down. How could Jae-won have achieved this level of power in just a few decades? 45 years, Jae-won calculated. I think I've executed it about 10 billion times. That's impossible. You'd have to skip eating and sleeping just to thrust 8 times a second. Who on earth can do that? I can actually thrust 100 times per second, Jae-won replied calmly. And that movement isn't just limited to a sword. Chung-Hu's eyes widened as if a sudden memory struck him. The sharp, alien energy he had felt since their very first meeting wasn't actually energy at all, nor was it anything like fighting spirit. It was pure, killing intent and an unyielding ambition to cleanse the world. This was the ultimate thrust. Finally, Chung-Hu understood. Jae-won had turned himself into the thrust itself, and he was still piercing through this world. Even at this very moment, Jae-won stood up. He wasn't exaggerating, he really had practiced his thrust 10 billion times. Jae-won held out a piece of paper in front of Chung-Hu and asked, "Do you remember this?" It was the contract they had signed before their duel. The loser would have to grant one wish for the winner. Jae-won's request was simple, to answer his questions with absolute honesty. That was it. As they stepped out of the training room, Jae-won asked him, "What is a master's tower?" Walking slowly beside him, Chung-Hu explained, "The things that make up those towers are nightmares. Those towers are ranked from F-class to S-class. The masters are those who finished creating an S-class tower while still an apprentice, becoming master creators at an exceptionally young age. But just because a master created it doesn't automatically make it a master's tower. Only special towers created without any connection to the seed can truly become a master's tower. We don't even know why they were created. No one in this world has any clue what the hell those masters are thinking. Everyone says that the masters are the ones pulling the strings behind the truth of this world. But one thing is certain. Every once in a while, an awakener emerges from among those who manage to clear a master's tower. Chung-Hu himself came from a master's tower. He was from the 4th tower of Master Melville, famously known in their world as Moby Dick. A massive white whale appeared on the very first floor of the tower, relentlessly hunting down humans. The difficulty of that tower might sound like a joke today, but back then, it was an absolute nightmare for me. Countless martial artists from Morim lost their lives. The fact that I was able to clear that tower was a true miracle. Chung-Hoo guessed that Jaewon must have also come from a master's tower. When he asked who the creator of that tower was, Jaewon replied that he thought it was Mulak. Hearing that name left Chung-Hoo completely speechless. He never imagined an awakener could actually clear Mulak's tower. He knew Mulak because they had once traveled together. The two of them continued their stroll, walking all the way out of town toward Keek's pub. Jaewon stared silently at the grilled meat skewer on his plate. Chung-Hoo, sensing his thoughts, wondered why food even existed in a world where people never felt hungry. Chung-Hoo chugged a gulp of beer, staring down into his cup. Chaos was actually once a blessed world. It was a place where souls worn out by the wars in the Great Lands could find sweet rest. People reclaimed their lives after being freed from the endless cycle of being warriors. They could lay down their weapons, and singers could sing of peace instead of war. Suddenly, a loud commotion broke out nearby. Jaewon glanced over. It looked like a typical drunken brawl. Deciding it was none of his business, he lowered his head and took a sip of his drink. It tasted just like water. After all, people in chaos never got drunk, never hungered, and never aged. They were only pretending to be drunk. Yet, in a paradise like this, humans ironically began to crave the exact opposite. They missed a real life that included death, so they started acting as if they were living for real. A life where they would die if they did not eat, and get drunk if they drank. A life where they had a physical body and a beating heart. Right in the middle of this deep, somber mood, Chung-Hoo suddenly shouted. One day, a few drunkards started doing something new. An expedition team was formed, dreaming of the impossible, gathering people to reclaim their real lives. It was the Abyss Expedition. But Jaewon did not understand. With so many places to choose from, why on earth did they pick the Abyss? Chung-Hoo slumped into his seat. Those people were looking for the fruit of resurrection. It is a fruit that grows on the branches of the tree of imagery at the very end of the abyss. The only way for the dead in this world to come back to life is by eating that fruit of resurrection. The Abyss Expedition was an alliance formed specifically to find that fruit. Back then, Chung-Hoo had already awakened, and he was at that fearless age where he did not care about anything. He was only 150 years old. Mulak was also a member of that expedition. He was the captain leading the expedition, and honestly, he was a very extraordinary guy. Chung-Hoo recalled his conversation with Mulak. The two of them had actually traded blows once. Mulak was a nightmare, so he should not have had any emotions, yet he deeply regretted creating those towers. The reason Mulak sought out the tree of imagery and headed into the abyss was because of a tower that would end all cultivation. That was why he joined the expedition. Chung-Hoo did not know what happened next, because he lagged behind and only made it to the entrance of the abyss. But Mulak actually reached the top of the tree of imagery, and the fruits began to fall from the branches. Thanks to that, every member of the expedition was able to return to chaos with their hands full of fruits. Jaewon suddenly sensed something was off. If old man Chung-Hoo had secured a fruit of resurrection, why on earth was he still here in chaos? Just then, Claire walked over carrying some food. She scolded Chung-Hoo for getting the story completely wrong. The expedition was a failure. They only succeeded in gathering the fruit, and nothing more. Chung-Hoo sadly recounted that when they returned to chaos, the monarchs and clan leaders of the Great Lands were already waiting at the exit. Since they lacked the courage to venture back into the abyss, the 4 fortress lords and 10 high priests who were part of the expedition fought back. But they were simply no match for those bastards. There was a massive power gap. The monarchs and clan leaders completely outclassed them. So, their fruits were stolen. Those scumbags have been using those stolen fruits to resurrect themselves every single time they die, and they have been doing this for 900 years now. It is as if they have a dedicated sanctuary built just for them, a place known as the Reincarnation Palace. The monarchs and the 5 great clans take turns resurrecting whenever they bite the dust. From the very beginning, who gets to live was already decided. They are the only ones allowed to live a normal life. Jaewon blinked as everything finally clicked. That explains why the people here are so indifferent. They all know that a real life and the fruit of resurrection are things they can never lay their hands on. Jaewon was about to ask more, but he saw Chung-Hoo slumped over the table, fast asleep. After faking being drunk for 1,000 years, he ended up getting wasted for real, without even realizing it. Claire continued with what she had heard. After the expedition ended, No one ever saw Mulak again. Before vanishing, he supposedly muttered something like, "He failed." But he did not truly fail. Just then, they had a visitor. It was James. He came to thank Jaewon for saving Carlton. Jaewon just blanked, having absolutely no idea who this guy even was. James let out a sigh and told him that next time he came to Gorgon, he should use the northern gate. Since he already knew his face, he would not check his papers. Of course, this had to be kept a secret from Carlton. James chuckled arrogantly. After sitting there for a bit, Jahir, the captain of the Demon Slayer squad, came rushing in. Pale with terror, he shouted, "We have a massive emergency!" Jaewon slung Chung-hoo over his shoulder and dashed off with Jahir. Looking at the black smoke rising from the fortress, he could already make an educated guess. The master of the fortress had likely fallen into a state no different from a living corpse. The spiritual pressure he had felt earlier was 10 times stronger than any of the other dead men he had encountered. Meanwhile, deep inside the fortress, or more accurately, right beneath it, Jaewon thought about the request of Commander Yurhen. The commander had begged him to save the lord of this fortress. Jaewon quickly realized that the fortress lord was transforming, and his condition was suddenly flaring up. Usually, this only happens once a week, but today there was a sudden complication. Zahir quickly reminded Jaewon, to avoid any misunderstanding, that the lord was actually a good man. Before struggling with this corruption, he was a living legend. After all, he was one of the few who accompanied the doctor of medicine, Cheongheo, during the Abyss expedition. Zahir told Jaewon that since Cheongheo was currently asleep, Jaewon could perform the Fiend Slash in his place. Jaewon hesitated. He had only been mimicking what Cheongheo did. His Fiend Slash wasn't nearly as good as the doctor's, and things would be different if he had actually been taught by the man himself. Meanwhile, the black smoke pouring from the castle grew even thicker. Right then, the commanders of the Fallen Tower and the Tower of Despair appeared to block their way. Under orders to let absolutely no one inside, the only authority they recognized was the Golden Sky Clan, not the corrupted fortress lord decaying inside. The commanders of the Fallen Tower and the Tower of Despair launched an attack from above. Zahir shoved Jaewon, yelling for him to get out of the way. Then, he faced both of them alone. Jaewon calmly murmured, "Oh, he is actually pretty good." With a sword in one hand and blocking a hammer with the other, Zahir couldn't believe members of the Golden Sky Clan had actually managed to infiltrate the fortress. Zahir deflected their strikes and warned them to think carefully. He told them that if they backed down now, the Lord would surely show mercy. The commander of the Tower of Despair sneered, "How can you call that thing rotting deep underground a fortress lord? That bastard can't even control his own power, let alone tell good from evil. That is not the heaven we choose to serve." The commander of the Tower of Despair spat back, asking if Zahir was seriously still following that monster, even after seeing its pathetic state with his own eyes. But Zahir's faith remained unshaken, believing their lord would return. The two traitors stopped talking, and the commander of the Fallen Tower seized the chance to swing his hammer at Zahir from behind. Unable to dodge in time, Zahir took a direct hit that sent him flying 8 meters away, his clothes shredded and hair a complete mess as he spat out white fluids. And those two were only 4th stage adapters. Theoretically, there was no way they should be able to defeat a 5th stage adapter, even if they teamed up on him. He couldn't even track their speed anymore. This wasn't just a normal upgrade, there was something incredibly dangerous at play here. Just as Zahir was about to scream for Jaewon to get out of here, the young man tossed the sleeping Cheongheo right onto his face, calling out, "Leave them to me." The commander of the Fallen Tower questioned Jaewon once more, trying to confirm if he could actually perform the Fiend Slash. Jaewon neither confirmed nor denied it. Instead, the two commanders used telepathy to silently evaluate him. On the surface, he didn't even look like an adapter. They seriously doubted if he was just bluffing, because who in their right mind would try to perform a Fiend Slash with a sword like that? Jaewon's build wasn't even half the size of the Fallen Tower commanders. To them, he looked like a dead man walking, but unfortunately for them, Jaewon heard every single word of their quiet whispers. Using insane speed, he flashed behind the Fallen Tower commander and delivered a devastating punch right to his face. Before the commander could even let out a squeak, he was sent flying, smashing right through a brick wall. Seeing this, the commander of the Tower of Despair rushed forward to save his partner, but Jaewon completely overwhelmed him. His armor shattered to pieces, and the commander of the Tower of Despair struggled to keep his balance, to avoid falling flat on his face. He swung his spear furiously at Jaewon, but the young man effortlessly sidestepped the attack. The commander then unleashed a rapid spinning spear technique, launching a relentless barrage at Jaewon, who simply stepped back to dodge every strike. He could feel a sudden surge of powerful energy just like before. Was it fueled by a heart full of hatred, or something else? The commander of the Tower of Despair snarled, "Do you really think a nobody like you can save the fortress, Lord?" But beneath those words, Jaewon could easily sense his intense fear. Did these fools really think they could pull off a betrayal with such pathetic power? It was absolutely laughable. He calmly replied that he wasn't the one who would save the Lord anyway. That was the old man Cheonkeo's job. But taking care of you two? That is child's play. Jaewon stepped right on the spear, launched himself into the air, and plunged his sword straight down. Commander Yurhen and his men hurried down to the basement to inspect the situation, and he swallowed hard in anxiety. It has not even been a single day since the medicine saint performed the fiend slash. How on earth did the Lord's condition deteriorate this quickly? Yurhen had personally checked him this morning and saw that the fiendification and energy levels had stabilized. So why was he suddenly losing his mind like this? Just when they finally had a sliver of hope that their Lord might be cured, this disaster had to strike. If they could have just bought one more month, they might have actually been able to save him. But right now, Jaewon's fiend slash was only a crude imitation. And unlike Mino, the Lord's corruption was far too advanced. An ordinary person would have turned into a fiend ages ago. But if they could just hold out for one more month, Jaewon's fiend slash might actually become fully functional. Yurhen grit his teeth, looking back at the men standing behind him. One of these people must know about Chuan. He had already realized long ago that there was a traitor among them. Some time ago, the fortress lord wanted to meet the one who could manipulate the mental collapse, so he went out to inspect the troops. But when he returned, he had already fallen into a mental collapse, looking neither human nor ghost. One of the witnesses to that event is right here, none other than Mai Han. Jurin began to grow suspicious of him. Meanwhile, Mai Han demanded that everyone stay on high alert, calling it an extreme emergency. If they delayed any longer, it would be the end of Gogen. Jurin was stunned. They couldn't perform the demon slash without the saint of medicine here. Did they really want the fortress lord to die? Mai Han knew that even if they all fought together, they wouldn't be strong enough to defeat the fortress lord, so he decided to perform the hungry ghost seal. If they waited any longer, it would be too late. At the very least, they had to protect the fortress lord's mental energy through the hungry ghost seal. Mai Han stared intently at Jurin, pressuring him to make a decision. Right at that moment, the commander of the Dark Squad walked in, carrying a mysterious chest. Jurin froze. He couldn't believe the Dark Commander, a member of the command squad, was a traitor, and the chest he was holding contained Chuan's dark crystal. Mai Han questioned Jurin on why he had hidden and hoarded such a critical item. This is the very future of Gogen. Mai Han pushed even harder, taking advantage of the situation. He accused Jurin, asking if he wanted to turn the fortress lord into a great hungry ghost. Just a single mid-level hungry ghost is already a massive threat to Gogen. A great hungry ghost is a disaster that commands countless other hungry ghosts, bringing utter destruction wherever it goes. Jurin clenched his fists, unable to argue. The fortress lord was losing his mind, and the saint of medicine was nowhere to be found. Mai Han's logic made perfect sense, but Jurin still couldn't shake his frustration. Performing the hungry ghost slash wasn't something just anyone could do. Was it really possible just because they had the dark crystal? Besides, the hungry ghost seal is a secret art of the Six Butterfly clan. Was Mai Han planning to bring a member of that clan here? Mai Han told Jurin not to worry. He had already summoned people who had mastered the secret art. They weren't from the Six Butterfly. If the hungry ghost seal was cast this way, the fortress lord's mental energy would be sealed inside the dark crystal. In the chaos, energy cannot be inherited, so if someone could possess a dark crystal filled with the fortress lord's mental energy, then that person would gain all of the fortress lord's mental energy and become the new ruler of Gogen. Jurin broke out in a cold sweat. If Gogen fell into the hands of a villain, they were finished. Jurin stared at the black-robed figure pulling the crystal from the chest. He couldn't believe anyone besides Choen, especially someone not from the Six Butterfly clan, could handle the dark crystal. Jurin recalled the fortress lord's previous words, and his face went pale. The one who could manipulate the mental collapse had finally shown themselves. From the start of the fortress, Lord's mental collapse 6 months ago, to his madness today, was it all part of Outer Commander Mai Han's plan? Panicking, Jurin quickly ordered his subordinates to stop Mai Han, but not a single soul listened. Jurin collapsed to his knees in despair. Every last one of them had turned traitor. There was absolutely nothing he could do. He felt deeply sorry to the fortress lord, realizing his own complacency had cost them Gogen. With tears streaming down his face, Jurin stood completely helpless. Suddenly, the ceiling caved in, scattering the crowd below. Choan and Jia Ho made an incredibly badass entrance, jumping down from above. The Dark Commander clicked his tongue. Maihan screamed, demanding to know who the hell Choan was and how he dared show his face here. Jia Ho threw down the commanders of the Fallen Tower and the Tower of Despair, yelling at Maihan to stop immediately because treason carried a death sentence. Maihan glared at the Fallen Tower commander, whose face instantly distorted before exploding. Maihan looked incredibly confident. Now that the evidence was blown to pieces, what did he have to fear? Furious, Jia Ho ordered his subordinates to draw their weapons and fight. This is a rebellion. If they complete the Hungry Ghost seal, everything Maihan planned will become reality. But as Jia Ho stepped forward, his own men drew their swords against him. They had joined the Forbidden Heaven sect, and they ordered Jia Ho to stay put until the Fortress Lord's sealing was complete. Jia Ho roared, "You traitorous cowards." Meanwhile, Chuan calmly assessed the situation and began negotiating with Jurin. As agreed, he would save the Fortress Lord, but under one condition: Gogen must protect him. But now, Gorgon has broken its promise to him, and this place can no longer protect him. That's why the terms of the deal have to change. Jaewon boldly declares that he will save the Castle Lord and kill every single traitor on the other side. In exchange, they must hand over Dr. Chunghu to him, and he will restart the conquest of the Abyss. And everyone here is going to help him do it. Hearing this, everyone is completely stunned. Maihan, however, finds it absolutely ridiculous. He had heard rumors about someone who could take out a dead man with a single blow. He had assumed it was just a lie. But now, it seems those rumors were true. In that case, he will have to go all out to put Jaewon down. Maihan orders his lackeys to gang up on him, surrounding Jaewon from all sides. Suddenly, Jaewon goes full Hidden Leaf Ninja mode. He pulls out his throwing daggers and fires them off everywhere. With his god-tier skills, he hurls them like deadly spears, completely shattering the enemy's formation. The cocky thugs leading the charge get hit, successfully getting permanently crippled, while the rest just keep rushing forward. Jaewon sighs as he realizes they just won't stop attacking him. Why are these guys so eager to bite the dust? Jaewon unleashes a basic thrust, aiming right at Maihan. He tries to block it with his sword, but he completely miscalculates. He can't block it directly, so Maihan has to parry the strike to redirect it, sending it blasting into the wall right next to the Castle Lord. Maihan breaks into a cold sweat. If he had been stubborn enough to take that hit head-on, he would be a dead man by now. Meanwhile, the other group uses telepathy to discuss their next move. If they can't keep the dead man sealed, they'll have no choice but to go with Plan B. They have to unleash the Black Cloud, even if it means wiping out everyone in Gorgon. Jaewon hears everything, and his face darkens. He points straight at Maihan, catching the old man off guard, and calls him out as the Outer Fortress Administrator of Gorgon and the Prime Elder of the Golden Sky Clan. He has no idea why they want to trigger Spirit Collapse, but Jaewon knows one thing. He absolutely loves people like them. Because people like that make it so much easier for him to destroy this world. Jaewon raises his sword as a massive, overwhelming aura surges from him. Maihan and his lackeys can sense the terrifying power of the upcoming attack. They mobilize, doing everything they can to block Jaewon. But Jaewon just raises his sword, pointing it straight toward the sky. A massive field of light forms in the sky, raining down devastating energy blasts. Maihan and his men get absolutely pulverized. Looking at him, Yurin sees a glimmer of hope. He recalls the words of the Castle Lord that the people of Gorgon need hope. A massive, unyielding hope that will never falter, no matter what it faces. Yurin can hardly believe that he is feeling that very hope from a young man who talks about destroying the world. Jaewon slices Maihan in half, pulling a total gojo on him. Gasping for his final breaths before turning to dust, the old man still finds the strength to curse Jaewon as a freak. Jaewon thrusts his sword straight into his face, making him vanish instantly. Right at that moment, Javier arrives. Chunghu is still sleeping like a baby, showing no signs of waking up. Jaewon just grabs the old man and hurls him hard against the wall. Chunghu screams in pain, his already bad back feeling completely shattered. Just then, the system sounds a red alert. The target's spirit collapse has exceeded 99.9%, and dead man transformation has begun. The system starts calculating the target's danger level. After a brief calculation, the results are undetermined. The system's prediction warns of an extremely dangerous dead man. Gorgon Fortress's automatic alarm is triggered, and massive tremors begin to shake the entire stronghold. Citizens panic and flee in all directions, while soldiers rush to evacuate everyone to safety. A thick, overpowering dark energy begins to billow from deep inside the fortress. Chung-hoo gets serious. He tells Yurin and Javier to head to the evacuation zone immediately, saying that he and Jae-won will handle things here. The two nod and quickly leave. Chung-hoo draws his sword, a new blade he just managed to swipe from somewhere, and puts it to use. Without hesitation, Chung-hoo begins tracing lines in the air. After all, the Castle Lord is an incredibly important friend to him. They shared so many wonderful memories together. As Chung-hoo performs his skill, he explains it to Jae-won so he can commit it to memory. Those forgotten memories are the entire purpose of the dead man's slash. If their minds are filled with memories, they can at least survive the worst-case scenario. As Chung-hoo is drawing, he spots a group of shadowy, dark figures manifesting right behind the Castle Lord. They cackle creepily, staring at Chung-hoo with terrifying eyes. Chung-hoo starts to tremble, realizing that is not the Castle Lord. Something absolutely horrifying is coming. The Castle Lord opens his eyes, snaps his chains, and floats into the air. His eyes are hollow, and his emaciated body is nothing but skin and bones. Chung-hoo shivers. That is definitely not the Castle Lord he once knew. As the Castle Lord steps onto the ground, a cold shiver runs down both Jae-won and Chung-hoo's spines. A primal, savage dread washes over them. The dark shadow behind the Castle Lord glares at them and utters, "What a surprise. It never expected to enter this world using this body. After all, even this man has turned into a dead man." The dark shadow cackled maniacally, asking Chung-hoo why he was still here in chaos. Didn't he already find what he wanted in the abyss 9 years ago? Chung-hoo instantly recognized the voice, and cold sweat drenched his entire body. This was the master of the Palace of Dead Men, located at the very heart of chaos, and the only person who could open the gates to the abyss. It was Soul King Catastrophe. Even after using doubt, Jae-won still couldn't identify the true nature of this dark shadow. This thing was similar to a dead man, yet it wasn't one. What on earth was it? He had no idea. With a wave of his hand, the master of the Palace of Dead Men released an incredibly suffocating pressure, making it hard for the two of them to even stand. He kept questioning Chung-hoo about why he was still here, asking if he was actually trying to protect this world. Chung-hoo collapsed to the ground. With just a flick of his finger, the monster had completely shattered the barrier he had painstakingly put up. The master of the Palace of Dead Men let out a raspy chuckle as his gaze shifted toward Jae-won. This young man was truly interesting, a human who possessed a pure heart despite being fully awakened. Chung-hoo was frozen, stiff, unable to even stand up. The authority of the master of the Palace of Dead Men was possession. He had definitely taken over the body of the fortress master by possessing him. If that was the case, then the entity in front of them right now was just his clone. It was unbelievable that a mere clone could exert such a terrifying amount of pressure. Jae-won knew Chung-hoo couldn't get back up, so it was his turn to step up. To the master of the Palace of Dead Men, this seemed like a total joke. Staring at Jae-won defiantly, Chung-hoo desperately grabbed Jae-won's clothes to hold him back, warning him that there was absolutely nothing they could do in this state. Even Mulak couldn't leave a single scratch on the Soul King. But Jae-won cut him off, telling Chung-hoo not to worry, completely confident in himself. He believed he could defeat the monster standing before them. The master of the Palace of Dead Men, the Soul King, began to laugh hysterically. He spat up a bunch of black threads from his throat, grabbed them, and pulled out a sword, ready for battle. Chung-hoo immediately recognized the weapon the Soul King had just pulled out. It was the Void Sword, a truly terrifying weapon. It had turned half of the expedition team into dead men in the blink of an eye. It was hard to believe he was already playing this trump card. The Soul King lunged forward, closing the distance. But Jae-won leaped back to dodge. The Soul King remarked that he had seen eyes just like Jae-won's once before. Knowing that Jae-won wanted to go to the abyss, the old monster felt an overwhelming rush of excitement. It turned out there was still someone in this world who wanted to reach its very end. The Soul King grabbed Jae-won's head with one hand and swung his sword down, but Jae-won flipped through the air to dodge it. At the same time, Jae-won delivered a counterstrike that snapped the Soul King's arm in half, before backing away to maintain his distance. Rubbing his face where he'd just been grabbed, Jae-won thought he had completely severed the Soul King's arm. However, in less than 3 seconds, that very arm lunged at him again, trying to grab him. Fortunately, his quick reflexes allowed him to dodge in time, though he still took a hit to his bicep, tearing away a chunk of his flesh. Gripping his sword tightly, Jaewon spun around to counterattack, slicing the Soul King completely in half. But the monster remained completely unfazed. His severed lower body floated in the air before slowly stitching itself back together. Resting his sword on the ground, the Soul King began to lecture him once again, saying that corruption was, in essence, a disease caused by time itself. With just a tiny scratch from the Void Sword, countless millennia would fail to pass, and that soul would eventually lose its fight against time. It would grow old, decay, and ultimately become a dead man. As the wound on Jaewon's arm rapidly rotted and decayed, he didn't hesitate to raise his sword and chop off his own arm. The Soul King gasped in surprise. He hadn't expected Jaewon to so calmly cut away a contaminated part of his own soul. To do it so easily required an incredibly strong will. But that alone wasn't enough, and the monster spat out another batch of swords. Several blades protruded from his body before shooting straight toward Jaewon. Realizing the swords were heading for Chungha, Jaewon stepped in front of the old man and deflected the incoming weapons. However, two of the swords managed to pierce through Jaewon's remaining arm and one of his legs. Without a second thought, he pulled the swords out and sliced away the rotting flesh from his arm and leg. As the Soul King charged in again, Jaewon raised his sword to block the strike. The sheer pressure of the collision sent Chunghu rolling and tumbling far away. If the fight kept going like this, Jaewon wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. No matter how many times he used doubt, he still couldn't find a single weakness in the monster before him. On top of that, strange golden numbered objects kept appearing before his eyes, completely throwing off his focus. Jaewon suddenly recalled what Chunghu had told him before. Every awakener possesses a unique world. This world is created from a keyword they receive upon awakening, something akin to their deepest desire or emotion. A powerful awakener can even harbor numerous living beings within their own world. Tightening his grip on his sword, Jaewon decided to gamble one more time. He deflected the Soul King's sword and took a quick step back. Jaewon activated his Moon Eye. Instantly, the surrounding space warped and shifted into a fiery crimson red. This was hell itself. He had always lived in a world like this, an underworld forged from sheer helplessness and rage. A blood-red eye manifested in the middle of the sky, glaring down at the Soul King. The old monster was genuinely amazed, as it was his first time witnessing a human's ideal world. Just as he opened his mouth to spit again, Jaewon lunged forward at blinding speed, stabbing the old man right through the mouth. In response, the Soul King unleashed another mass of tangled vines. Binding Jaewon, the old monster got right in his face, slithering his tongue out. Jaewon kept charging blindly at the beast, having no clue how to end this nightmare. Soul King Catastrophe grabbed Jaewon's face and slammed him violently into the ground. The earth shattered, triggering a massive cave-in. Soul King Catastrophe stomped his heavy foot onto Jaewon's motionless chest. It had been ages since the monster last encountered someone who refused to let go of their hatred like Jaewon. He pulled another void sword from his body, aiming it at Jaewon, ready to plunge it down. But just as the blade was about to pierce him, Jaewon suddenly snapped his eyes open. With a swift swing, Jaewon sliced Soul King Catastrophe in half. The old monster's eyes widened in utter shock, completely clueless as to what had just happened. Jaewon tossed his coat aside. His real fun was just beginning. Soul King Catastrophe's severed body rolled across the dirt, yet the creature remained entirely confident that Jaewon couldn't leave a single lasting scratch on him. He began reassembling his body, returning even more massive and monstrous than before. Soul King Catastrophe swung his sword at Jaewon. Jaewon slipped past the blade, only for the beast to lash out with his other massive hand. Sent flying, Jaewon crashed hard into the wall and coughed up blood. Without giving him a moment to breathe, Soul King Catastrophe lunged again. Reacting just in time, Jaewon slipped behind the monster and thrust his sword forward. The monster extended his neck to dodge Jaewon's strike. Cackling maliciously, he boasted that he had been watching all of creation just to build this world. They all tried to climb to the top of the tree of imagery, just to satisfy their curiosity. He knew Jaewon was also searching for his own answer about this world. He asked Jaewon what question he was desperately seeking to answer, but Jaewon remained dead silent, focused entirely on defending and counterattacking. Soul King Catastrophe began babbling to himself, continuously guessing what kind of answers Jaewon was after. Meanwhile, the brutal clash continued. Soul King Catastrophe clearly held the upper hand, while Jaewon couldn't care less about the nonsense the bastard was spewing. Jaewon realized he had definitely been in a situation like this before. It reminded him of his encounter with that demon, Beastlane. Then it clicked. He was fighting a replica connected directly to the real host. Taking a deep breath, he unleashed a straight thrust that tore Soul King Catastrophe to shreds. Yet, the monster's remains kept rambling on. He was ridiculously confident in his regeneration. He opened his massive jaws to swallow Jaewon whole, but Jaewon seized the moment and leaped high into the air. His theory was correct. He could see the guiding thread, just like before. If this thing is just a clone, there must be a link to its true body. Gripping his hilt tightly, Jaewon thrust straight down at the connection point. Soul King Catastrophe's eyes bulged in horror. It couldn't be. This was Ren's ultimate technique. It was vaporizing him, making regeneration completely impossible. Before completely dissolving, Soul King Catastrophe left him with a final warning, promising to meet Jaewon at the gates of the abyss. Left alone, Jaewon collapsed to the ground, gasping heavily. He muttered to himself that he needed to become much stronger. Simple thrusts wouldn't be enough. He needed a wider arsenal, especially a powerful slash technique. A slash is perfect for taking out massive armies, but against a single, powerful foe, its wide area of effect makes it lose its punch. He had only used it this time as a distraction to buy himself a little more time. Jaewon needed a new skill, a specialized technique designed for one-on-one combat against high-tier enemies. When Zahir and Yuren returned, the place was nothing but ruins. Chunghu lay completely unconscious. Having regained consciousness, the castle lord beckoned Jaewon over, having some final words to share. He began to speak from the heart. Though he had turned into a bloodthirsty fiend, he had still been watching Jaewon the whole time. He expressed his deep gratitude to the young man for standing up against Soul King Catastrophe. Grasping Jaewon's hand tightly, the castle lord whispered weakly, "It's time for Gorgon to change." With those words, he channeled a warm, golden light into Jaewon. Mysterious symbols began to etch themselves onto the young man's arm. The castle lord closed his eyes in pure satisfaction. There was something so comforting and familiar about Jaewon. He could feel a deep warmth within Jaewon's memories. As the castle lord's body began to turn to dust, he offered a gentle smile, pleading with Jaewon to never let the hope in his heart burn out. Right at that moment, the fortress soldiers finally arrived. Jaewon dragged his battered body to his feet. As soon as the crowd caught sight of the tattoo on his arm, they instantly fell to their knees. Tears welled up in Yuren's eyes. He finally understood this was the late castle lord's final wish for his successor. The kneeling crowd respectfully hailed Jaewon as the new master of Gorgon. 2 days later, the restoration of Gorgon Fortress was officially underway. But Jaewon was having none of it, stubbornly refusing the title and telling them to give it to anyone else. Feeling helpless, Yuren had no choice but to remind Jaewon of his promise. He had promised to save the castle lord and eliminate the traitor. But now that the lord was gone, it was Jaewon's responsibility to take over Gorgon Fortress. Jaewon felt a massive headache coming on. How on earth did things end up like this? He had no time to waste playing ruler in this fortress. He had to get to the abyss. He wanted to dump this leadership role onto anyone willing to take it. Yuren immediately shut down the idea, explaining that it was absolutely impossible because Gorgon would never accept anyone else. By Gorgon, he meant the very mark etched onto Jaewon's skin, which was why the title of master couldn't simply be handed over to just anyone. The master of Gorgon only changes when the current one is no longer of this world. Yuren slammed a thick stack of documents onto the desk, demanding that Chuan finish reviewing them by today. Since Choan had just taken over as the new city lord, Yuren had prepared some extra notes and helpful files to help him get his bearings. But when Chuan pulled out one of the papers, he realized it was the official code of Gogan. The laws were so hilariously laid back, it was no wonder the locals always praised their city lord. Yuren quickly showed Chuan where the desk supplies were kept, then headed out to handle other business, telling Chuan to call him if anything came up. Curious, Chuan opened one of the drawers. Inside, he found a crumpled ball of paper with the words, "The 17th ruler" scrawled across it. Suddenly, the paper ball began to squirm, folding itself into the shape of a tiny old man, before cheerfully greeting Chuan. It admitted it had no idea who he was, but since he found the note, it meant he was officially the new ruler. And it assumed he was probably clueless about how to run Gogan Castle. Chuan just stared blankly at the babbling piece of paper. He broke into a cold sweat. Paper magic? Was this some kind of paper doll created from spiritual energy? The little paper man kept on rambling, explaining that a ruler's absolute #1 job was simply to enjoy themselves. Apparently, a great ruler was someone who just had a good time. As for castle security, that was left to the surveillance team, while domestic and foreign affairs were handled by the External Relations Department. The Lord literally didn't have to do a single damn thing. It was a time-honored tradition here. According to the data the paper doll had compiled, half of the previous rulers had overworked themselves, leading to complete physical and spiritual burnout. None of them lived long lives. So, this warning wasn't just for Chuan, it was for the sake of Goguen. It begged him not to be greedy, not to try to change anything, and absolutely not to run himself into the ground. Everyone here knew all too well that this world was almost impossible to change. That was why Chuan should just maintain the status quo and make tiny, slow adjustments. It told him not to make decisions based on what the majority wanted, but to do things based on his own heart and will alone. This was a painful lesson learned in blood by the former lord. He pleaded over and over, begging Chuan not to get greedy and not to try to change what was beyond his control. In the chaos, the only good ruler was a ruler who did absolutely nothing. Having delivered its message, the paper figure crumpled back into an ordinary ball of paper. Chuan fell silent, lost in thought. He was starting to realize what a ruler actually represented in this place, an existence that crushed hope just to survive, a figurehead meant to block any real change to keep the status quo going for generations. Noticing Chuan's prolonged silence, Jurin asked what was on his mind. But Chuan had already made his decision. He was going to abolish Goggen's system of rulership. Jurin was completely bewildered by this. Chuan then asked him, "What is a fortress?" Even though Jurin found the question a bit dumb, he still answered seriously. A fortress is a citadel, and a citadel is a military structure built to protect allies from their enemies. Chuan followed up with another question. What if that enemy no longer exists? What happens if no one ever tries to invade the fortress? Jurin froze as Chuan's underlying point began to click. If that were the case, the fortress would have no reason to exist anymore, meaning a ruler would be completely pointless. But to Jurin, a city without any enemies was simply impossible. Chuan confidently declared, "It will be possible, because I am going to unify the chaos." Funerals would no longer exist in the chaos. Instead, they would hold soul ceremonies to cheerfully send off those who had vanished forever. If a funeral was a ritual to mourn the deceased, then the soul ceremony was a ritual to let them go. During this ceremony, the tale of that departed soul would be told over and over again. It was the final gift that the Chaos could offer to those who had left it behind. Jurin presided over the soul ceremony. The former lord's name was Imil Rose, and they couldn't even give him a proper burial. This was the only thing they could do to honor him, and the crowd listened in solemn silence. Chuan leaned against the window. Hearing the old lord's name, he finally understood the true identity of the eccentric person who had thrust him into this position of ruler. Chuan could hear every single word of the people whispering around him, doubting whether he could actually handle being the city lord. Just then, Chuan noticed some movement beside him. It was a veiled woman, smiling softly as she looked at him. Right on cue, a short, stubby man shuffled over to try and make acquaintance. Chuan seemed to recognize the veiled woman, and the two began whispering about the nosy newcomer. Meanwhile, the old man chimed in, asking Chuan how old he was. He answered honestly, probably around 60. The old man kept probing, asking if he was the son of the former ruler. Chuan could clearly read his mind, as well as the thoughts of the onlookers watching the drama unfold. The old man extended his hand, introducing himself as Jang Inhan, the president of the Deep Forest Scholar Guild. He mentioned he had heard rumors that Chuan was rather uncooperative. At long last, he felt he could pay Goguen back for the humiliation of having to humble himself there 15 years ago. Back then, he had to beg for permission to establish a branch office in Goguen, all while bribing the guards at the Northern Watchtower. He had been captured by Carlton and then flat out rejected by the former ruler. But now, that ruler has already kicked the bucket. And Carlton, the guy who locked him up? He is currently clinging to life in the hospital. As for the new ruler, he is just a wet-behind-the-ears kid, making this a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Jaewon extended his hand to shake Jang Il-han's. Seizing the moment, the old man immediately cast his highest-level illusion skill on the boy. Jaewon saw the gates of hell swing open behind him, with a massive fire dragon stepping out. Everyone watching could tell something was seriously wrong with Jaewon. They all silently realized that Jang Il-han had unleashed his devastating Nine Hells technique on Jaewon. The president of the Scholar Guild gloated inwardly. This was his ultimate, highest-level illusion technique. He was absolutely certain Jaewon was trapped in the illusion of the underworld, watching the red dragon close in on him. Any second now, the kid would start crying and screaming, begging to do whatever the old man demanded. But then, Jae-won smirked a silent slap right to Jang Il-han's face. He squeezed the old man's hand tightly. You guys certainly have a unique way of greeting people here. Now, it is my turn to return the favor. Jang Il-han's eyes widened in sheer terror as his entire body began to tremble. Jae-won unleashed soul shatter on him, instantly plunging the old man into his own personal hell. Jang Il-han practically pissed his pants, his face turning pale as he collapsed to his knees, completely unable to stand. The surrounding crowd erupted into whispers once again. Jae-won calmly passed judgment. Since Jang Il-han had insulted him, the ruler should, by all rights, beat him as a warning. However, he decided to show mercy and spare his life this time. But there won't be a next time. Chung Hyo scoffed, sighing, "Is the show already over? That was so boring." Next on the agenda was Jae-won's inauguration speech. But for some reason, Chung Hyo got a very bad feeling about this. And boy, was he right. Jae-won bluntly announced, "I do not give a damn who Emil Groshek is, what he did, what his life was like, or what kind of ruler he was. To put it bluntly, I do not care at all. I know none of you are happy with me. You probably think I am just some kid with mediocre spirit who lucked his way into becoming the ruler. And while that might be true to some extent, I really had no intention of doing this. I just suddenly ended up as the ruler. You do not want me here, and I do not want this position either. So how could this ever end well?" After thinking it over for about 30 seconds, he came up with a solution. He declared that anyone who could defeat him in a one-on-one duel would become the new ruler. Hearing this, the crowd was stunned at first, but then someone slammed the table and burst out laughing. It was the president of the South Sea Guild, Kamen. He asked Jae-won if there were any other conditions. Jae-won added that the time limit would be 1 month. Anyone who challenges him and loses must join the Abyss Expedition team, which will set sail in 2 months. Everyone was absolutely flabbergasted. Yet, Jurgen had complete faith in Jae-won. After all, he had defended Gorgon from enemies and was fully recognized by the former lord. Even when Jae-won made wild claims about destroying the world, or even unifying chaos, and even when he walked up to the podium and made everyone feel extremely uneasy, Jurgen decided to wait and see. He believed that Jae-won never did anything without a good reason. That was Jurgen's faith, but reality was harsh. First thing in the morning, Hiron barged into his room to deliver some terrible news. Jurgen rushed to Jae-won's room, looking ready to kill, demanding to know how much paperwork he had let pile up. But the guy was nowhere to be found. Instead, only Carlton, despite being covered in bandages, was sitting there grinding through the documents. Jurgen's blood boiled. Where on earth did Jae-won sneak off to this time? At that exact moment, Jae-won and Chung Hyo were down in the basement, smashing statues. Having just come up with a new technique, Jae-won got into position to show it off to Chung Hyo. Chung Hyo admitted that Jae-won's stance actually looked a lot better than usual. Looking at the movement of his sword, he guessed Jae-won had been influenced by his own swordsmanship. Chung Hyo then suggested a supposedly cool name, Pierce. But Jae-won just stared at him with pure disgust. Chung Hyo threw a fit, screaming that he had had enough. As a legendary doctor, how could he suffer under the boot of an arrogant brat like Jae-won? Jae-won completely ignored him, playing dumb as he thrust his sword straight at Chung Hyo. The old man scrambled to dodge, cursing Jae-won out for having no respect for his elders. Jae-won's strike grazed the old man and slammed right into the wall behind him. Suddenly, someone fell out of the wall with a loud thud. It was the president of the Thunder God Guild, Yong-yoon. He was completely knocked out cold, having no idea what on earth just happened to him. The lightning god was basically cosplaying a search dog to sniff out Jae-won. And yep, those canine instincts led him straight down to this basement. Yong-yoon came here itching for a one-on-one with Jae-won to claim the top spot, not giving a single damn if people called his actions cowardly. He couldn't care less. To him, an assassination or a fair one-on-one were exactly the same, as long as his target ended up dead. But suddenly, a massive shockwave shook the place. Yong-yoon poked his head out to look, only to realize that every single rumor about Jae-won was completely wrong. Still, Yong-yoon confidently charged out to challenge Jae-won, absolutely convinced he was going to win. Chung Hyo sighed in disappointment. How can a guildmaster like Yong-yoon stoop to launching a cheap sneak attack? Have you no shame? Jae-won didn't even bat an eye, simply telling Yong-yoon to hurry up and bring it on. Sparking with electricity like a bootleg Pikachu, Yong-yoon charged in brandishing his scissors. He even confidently unleashed his ultimate move, Advent of the Lightning God, firing a massive sphere of pure electricity straight at Jae-won. But before the attack could even land, Jae-won effortlessly slipped behind him and slammed him face first into the dirt. After getting his clock cleaned, Young-yoon immediately fell in line. He eagerly promised to keep his word to Jae-won, and from that moment on, he became his loyal follower. Young-yoon actually came from one of the 5 great families of the Great Land. It took him exactly 100 years to reach this point. To put it bluntly, he was nothing more than a slave to the Yowon clan. The comrades who had scaled the tower alongside him were forced into the clan as well, living out the rest of their days together. But one by one, they were sent off to the battlefield or died in chains as slaves. For nearly 100 years, Young-yoon slaved away for the Yowon clan, watching almost all of his old comrades drop dead one after another. Yet, Young-yoon miraculously survived. Through the trust he painstakingly built over a century, he finally climbed his way up to the status of a retainer. But on the very day he earned that title, for the first time in his life, Young-yoon chose to rebel against his fate. He refused to live like a dog forever. So, Young-yoon threw away 100 years of accumulated trust and successfully stole the Yowon clan's most sacred, highly guarded secret technique. The crown jewel of his heist was the lightning god technique. The moment he mastered it, every single cell in his body was purified, allowing him to tap into the technique's absolute full potential. And of course, that little stunt made him a marked man. The Yowon clan hunted him ruthlessly for 25 years, ultimately beheading him right before he was summoned to chaos. But thanks to that same lightning god technique, Young-yoon managed to secure the number 9 spot among the 10 clans for the past 100 years. That is why his pride was wounded. How could someone like Jae-won, who had not even lived for a century, be the ruler of chaos? Then again, the divine physician, Chung Heo, knew the taste of true despair better than anyone else from his days with the Abyss expedition team. He just smiled at Young-yoon and told him he should actually count his blessings, because he was lucky enough to meet Jae-won before experiencing what true, soul-crushing despair felt like. Meanwhile, Jae-won completely ignored them, focusing entirely on smashing stone statues. Young-yoon pouted, still unconvinced. Cheong-heo patiently explained that just 1 week before Young-yoon arrived in Gorgon, the entire fortress was on the verge of falling to the Golden Sky clan. He still had no idea how they managed to sway Gorgon's own people to betray them and switch sides. But he could feel they had been plotting Gorgon's downfall for a very, very long time. Fortunately, Jae-won single-handedly dragged Gorgon back from the brink of ruin and even defeated the Poison King lurking inside the previous lord's body. Caught completely off guard, Young-yoon grumbled, asking why Cheong-heo hadn't told him any of this sooner. Cheong-heo fired right back, pointing out that Young-yoon had jumped the gun, trying to assassinate the guy before even listening to a word of explanation. As they bickered, some new faces suddenly showed up. It was a massive, burly guy who wasted no time demanding a duel with Jae-won. This was Kangwang, the leader of the Fire King clan. Standing right beside him was the leader of the South Sea clan, but Kangwang insisted on going first. Resting his sword lazily on his shoulder, Jae-won made it clear he wasn't about to waste his breath. "Just come at me both at once," he muttered. He was too busy perfecting his swordsmanship to play these games. The Fire King leader let out a mocking scoff and lunged forward, cloaking himself in roaring flames before throwing a heavy strike at Jae-won. But our boy easily sidestepped the attack. From the sidelines, Cheong-heo shrieked, "Hey, don't go burning the whole place down." The two soon locked blades. The Fire King leader was still grinning with absolute confidence, while Jae-won remained completely unfazed. With a swift move, Jae-won punched the Fire King's blade aside, spun on his heel, and delivered a casual, light thrust. The impact sent the Fire King leader flying 10 billion meters away, cratering him deep into the wall. Next up was the leader of the South Sea clan. Water and ice swirled furiously around him as he took his stance, ready to face Jae-won. Jae-won sighed in pure boredom. First lightning, then fire, and now water? Is this guy really supposed to be any stronger than the last one? Jae-won dashed forward to make the first move, but the South Sea leader blocked it with cool composure. Instantly, Jae-won realized this guy was built different. Unlike the other two hotheads who just blindly rushed him, this guy was actively trying to predict and control his movements. The South Sea leader swung his blade downward, prompting Jae-won to leap high into the air and strike from above. The South Sea leader quickly leapt backward, narrowly dodging the blow. He realized that if he'd been hit by that last attack, he would have been ground to dust. Without even unleashing his full power, the leader of the South Sea sect sheathed his sword and conceded. They finally agreed to sit down and discuss the Abyss expedition. The three losers ended up sitting right next to each other. The leader of the Fire King sect barked right in the face of the Thunder Saint Guild leader. He just couldn't accept it. How did Jundong only barely lose, while he was the one who got absolutely humiliated? Jundong acted like he didn't hear a thing, completely ignoring the guy while standing there and whistling. After all, they had already lost. So their only choice now was to shut up and join the Abyss expedition. What else could they do? As for Kamen, the leader of the South Sea sect, his goal in coming here wasn't to overthrow the city lord. Instead, he wanted to join the Abyss expedition team itself. You see, Kamen used to be close friends with the former city lord. Back then, he wasn't strong enough, so he couldn't join the previous expedition into the Abyss. Back then, when all their achievements were stolen and everyone lost hope, Kamen witnessed the tragic downfall of the Abyss expedition team. That happened 900 years ago. Since then, Kamen has been training relentlessly, waiting for this exact moment. As for the leader of the Fire King sect,